This is the Art of Darkness podcast with Kevin Kautzman
and Brad Kelly. We're a couple of very online writers interested in the dark side of what drives creative people to create against all odds.
This show is about art and the people who make it, what it costs them, and what it takes to bring something unique and impactful into the world.
Each episode, we excavate the life and work of an artist you might think you know.
Don't worry, they're all safely dead.
On every episode, we try and find out just what the hell was wrong with them and how they worked through their darkness to create something that lives on after them and continues to move culture.
Find us online at artofdarkpod.com and on Twitter at artofdarkpod.
All right, and we are back. Art of Darkness, artofdarkpod.com, patreon.com/artofdarkpod, at artofdarkpod. I think that's all of them. We are back after shortly after our epic 6-hour Aleister Crowley episode. So check that out if you haven't already. But we are talking about
thou wilt shall be the whole of the pod.
And
yeah, 6 hours. So we've recovered from that more or less. And we are back now talking about somebody else who's kind of in the same milieu sometimes, as we're going to see. This is the great writer and, quote, sexual adventurer, Anaïs Nin. And I'm pronouncing that right because I had to go look to see how she pronounced it. But before we get too deep into that, I want to introduce our guest. You guys are probably already familiar with him. This is the great Gio Pennacchietti of all kinds of things, right? Host of Content Minded Corner, omnipresent internet figure, artist, writer, gonzo philosopher, union futurist. What am I missing? Anything, Gio?
Failed academic.
Yes.
That's what I put in there.
That makes three of us. That makes three of us. This is why we're doing this, man. It's a post-academic podcast. This is for all of us who got booted. So you're in good company.
Welcome to the pod, Gio.
True.
Glad to have you. Glad to have you.
Oh yeah, it's been great, man. It's been a long time coming. You said you wanted to do. You had a list of people you wanted to do an episode for. Then I saw Anaïs Nin. I'm like, yes, let's do that one.
Cool.
Let's just totally you know. Oh man, it's. I can't even describe it. No, yeah, I read House of Incest many years ago, and it's in my research, especially with Content Minded, especially the various stuff I do with Catherine D. It always comes up about the whole mommy GF thing and the internet and how the sort of like internet pornography especially warps people's preferences. But Anaïs Nin's very interesting in that. Like I was saying to you guys, I feel like she's the model of what my good friend H.P. Lovecraft calls the new femininity.
Yeah.
So I feel like from a right-wing perspective, she is very important to study for, maybe not for the way that MFA graduates study her. But
All right.
I'm glad to hear you here, bro. Boys, it's a long time coming. So.
Yeah, it's been a while, but I think we started talking about this like 6 months ago, but that's how the show works, man. Stuff takes a long time. I've been reading nothing but Nin for the last month, so
wait. I don't know anything about Anaïs Nin or
this is what I'm just about to ask you.
House of what?
Kevin. Kevin. Before we say anything else, Kevin, we'll start with our question. Kevin, what do you know about Anaïs Nin?
I don't even know how to pronounce her name. Anaïs Nin. I really hardly know anything. I know she's a writer. This is a really gaping hole, so to speak, in my my cultural education. Everyone has these, and one of the things about this show, I try to be honest, and I don't try to pose as someone who knows all and everything. And so I've been looking forward to this because I like to think I have a pretty comprehensive, education. But then again, I was educated in public schools all the way through. So in any event, I know next to nothing. I would, I guess she's an American. I think, and
Cuban American, right?
We'll get into it.
Okay.
We'll
all right.
Yeah.
And a stylist of prose. That's really the beginning and the end of what I know. I kind of place her in the mid-century of the 20th century.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. Yeah. Otherwise, I'm ignorant, and I fully expect to be bent over and schooled.
Excellent.
during this episode.
Excellent. Well, all right.
Well, she certainly was bent over.
Hey.
Oh, man. Okay, get rid of the low brow jokes first.
No, that's all right. Yeah,
love it.
We aim for the middle, and it means sometimes we're high, sometimes we're low.
Mm-hmm.
Well, she definitely was the mid Castiza of her day. So
I think that's
okay. All right, we're gonna find out, aren't we? Rock and roll.
So all right, so let me just jump into it. So,
well, Brad, before we do, what are you gotta tease the Patreon After Dark? Patreon.com/Art of Dark Pod. We're shooting for 333 Patreon subscribers by the end of 2023. We're starting to do numbers. So every episode gets an extra 20, 30, sometimes more minutes. So what are we going to do on After Dark today, Brett?
Yeah, this is something that we're gonna gloss over as is necessary in the normal show, but we're gonna go into more detail in the After Dark, and that is the time when adult Nin stooped her dad. On purpose.
What?
Yeah.
Oh.
It's real.
Yeah. So I don't want to say much more about it, but we're going to get into that. And we've got some stuff to say about it.
And if you have enough money, go to patreon.com/Johnny Productions as well. Yeah. So
there you go.
Yes.
Please go to Art of Darkness, patreon.com/Art of Darkness. These boys are doing quality stuff. I think that literature, I mean, I'm not a big literary man myself. I'm much more in the visual arts, but I feel like what you two are doing is valuable and niche, and usually that translates into a loyal fan base when you are valuable and niche. So there you go.
I like to think we're building a loyal fan base. I think we are. Yeah, a little bit at a time. Yeah. So, let's get into it. All right. So just kind of preliminary stuff. Angela, Anaïs, Una, Antelina, Rosa, Edelmira, Nin, E. Kumel. That is the full name of our subject on.
That's an entire Scrabble bag of Scrabble tiles right there.
It really is.
Gracious.
Yeah. And her child, like those long lists of names, it will reflect throughout her life in terms of less than stellar upbringings, but
for sure. But I just think it's it's a half a dozen names, seven names, 8 names, which is just fantastic. I love it. So she's a French born. She is described as a French born American diarist, but she was French born to Cuban parents, right? So you're talking somebody who literally is sort of practically homeless in the grander sense, right? You can imagine your Cuban parents, you're born in France, you grow up in France, you live in the United States, she's all over the place. And we're going to get into more of the details.
Yeah, that's very important as well. Like the displacement of herself. Well, you go, sorry. I keep interrupting.
Not at all, man.
I was also going to make a joke about how they're the most erotic of races as well, but that's, French Cuban. If she was Italian, I mean, my God, she'd be even worse, but that's
awesome. So I want to get into a little bit of family background because I think you start to see her kind of being assembled out of her family history. And remember, we got to just establish, I guess, 2 things off the bat. Her sex life is going to be more a part of this story than maybe any other subject we've ever covered. It's necessary. It's part of it's integral to the Nin story.
Even more than Crowley?
Yes.
Wow.
Yes.
Yeah. Crowley might have done more numbers, maybe, but it's more than half the story. It's at least half the story with Nin. But she's also a writer. She's a powerful writer, and we're gonna see that. Okay, so talking a little bit about her background, I'll start kind of with her mother, Rosa Kumel E. Vorigod, and I'm gonna probably mispronounce something like that, but she's born in 1871. Our Nin is born in 1903. Her mother's born in 1871. She's the oldest of 5 daughters and 4 brothers. And her parents were a rich Danish merchant and a French Cuban woman, right? So again, another whole anomaly. This whole Danish part of her background. Her grandfather, Nin's father was born in 1879. Joaquin is his name. He's a poor musician, descendant of minor Spanish nobility, right? So she's got this money in the background, this nobility in the past, and we'll see how that kind of ends up playing out. Now, Nin's maternal grandfather was this very kind of adventurous businessman, this Danish merchant. But her Nin's grand uncle, so her grandfather's brother, made a fortune supplying slaves to Cuban sugar plantations. So we've got that in the background as well. Now this is
no, I'm not making that joke. No.
Nin's grandfather kind of distanced himself from this, but it's kind of, I mean, we've got a slave trader in the family. Nin's grandmother on her mother's side gave birth to 9 children and then was thrown out of the house for possibly having a romantic relationship with some other man. So her maternal grandmother, abandoned her children and just lived a life doing as she pleased. So that's not even on the Nin side. That's on the Clemmel side. But the Nin side is just as much like this. Keeping up with Rosa, Nin's mother, ends up being very well educated, right? She's the child of this rich Danish merchant. She's educated on Long Island and in France, and in the finest finishing schools in Havana. So again, a very cosmopolitan woman, right? And what that kind of education then was for her class was really to make you into an excellent wife. That was the whole point of that educational system, is make you cultured and refined, right? And manners and etiquette and all of these kinds of things. However, it kind of backfired with Nin's mother, because all of this international travel and things makes her independent and self-sufficient. So she is cultured and refined, but she doesn't necessarily make a great wife because she's seen the world, right? She's a badass in her own right. So that ends up kind of causing problems. Now,
what's that line from Lebowski? It's hard to keep them down on the farm after they've met Carl Hungus.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
A little bit of that. Yeah. She's a rootless cosmopolitan.
She literally is a rootless cosmopolitan.
Yeah.
And throughout her work, the one persistent theme, to get into it, I guess, would be that domesticity is her number one enemy. And she always goes back to the theme of, well, when we get into erotica, we'll see that the women is fully liberated. But when it comes to her personal essays in her own voice, domesticity is like this thing that women are awakening from. So, for example, in her essay, what's it called? On Truth and Reality, she says the first one, each cycle was a different drama. So I think she was referring to Tryst with Henry Miller, which we'll get into, of keeping her diary. Each cycle was a different drama. The first was one of relation to the missing father. The second cycle was the relation to the mother, from which I took the concept of female sacrifice. The third was the assertion of my own creative will. A final synthesizing analysis by a woman finally brought me to a harmony among all the paths of myself. But it was only that the diaries were published that it became entirely free of guilt. And then, of course, she talks about the role of women in domestic life being that of essentially eternal sacrifice without reward. So as a woman, I'm fully aware that my personal world was the source of my strength and my psychic energy. The creation of a perfect personal world was the root of my inspiration. So women is concerned with not just losing the center, which she knows the value of. So in other words, the biggest theme is about her trying to travel, and there's different selves and different sides to myself. And she really is the first BPDE girl in that sense, that she takes on these different vestas of self. But I'll get into it with more of an academic paper. But this is the theme, the domesticity, and crushing that domesticity is one of the persistent themes in both her novels, her erotica, and the way that she depicts men in her erotica, which we'll get into. But keep in mind, like you said, Brad, that this is a linchpin of her existence, is the fact that she is essentially a rootless cosmopolitan. So sorry
no, not at all. That was perfect, and that's exactly right. And we see, you're talking about it in her writing. We'll see it in her life too. The different ways that it manifests in her different living situations. Right. It definitely is a constant running issue that she's working through. And that's one thing too. The boundaries between her writing and her life are blurry at best.
Oh, especially when she talks about that one province in Spain or Morocco, I believe, or is it Tunisia? Yeah.
So, talk about her father a little bit. Her father was born in Cuba to a Spanish cavalry officer and his Cuban wife, right? So, Now they moved back to Spain, but apparently at this time, if you were born in Cuba, it was basically a sign of sort of being low-born, right? Even if you're from Spanish people, you born in Cuba, it means you're kind of dirty, right? And so he's kind of stayed in Spain trying to wear this off, trying to become not a Cuban. And partly how he did this was he becomes a snob. He's interested in the finest of fine things, right?
Yeah. Nobody does this today.
Right.
Nobody leaves the Midwest and lands in LA or New York or London and becomes
starts throwing money around.
Well,
yeah.
right.
It makes TikToks about going to different cafes.
Right.
So,
Right. Now he was, to his credit, he was a talented piano player. I mean, of course, he thought that he was an absolute genius, but he was apparently quite talented and would make a living at it at certain times in his life. He ends up leaving Spain after he tries to seduce a young woman, and the woman's father threatens to horsewhip him. So instead of standing around and standing up for himself or fighting to have this woman, he just bounces.
That is exactly the kind of energy we need to bring back these days. I tell you what. Return to horsewhip.
Yeah. So he bounces to Cuba, where he still has some family, and he kind of plays sheet music in music stores to make money, tries to put on concerts and whatnot. And then he meets Nin's mother, Rosa. He's immediately disapproved of by Rosa's father. And yet eventually, like, Rosa, through a declaration of love and really pushing for it, eventually they end up, it ends up working out and they get married. They decide to, Rosa's also a bit of a singer. So they literally have a concert, and then they get married, a concert together, and then they get married 6 days later. And then Rosa's father pays for both of them to move to France, offers to buy a piano for Joaquin, and then also offers to put them up and pay for their living until Joaquin can get on his feet. So, I mean, that's kind of a, as a musician, he's not like going to be he's not a doctor or or something. He's a guy who plays piano, who's going to show up in France where he has no connections, and he's going to try to make a living as a musician. Trying to keep up with his career, the family ends up moving around a bunch. They moved to Berlin and then Brussels before Nin turns 9. So she's born in France in 1903, shortly after they moved there. And again, Berlin and then Brussels by the time she's 9 years old. And then by the time they get to Brussels, she's got 2 little brothers. Now, Nin is a dark-eyed, dark-haired, dark-complexioned, she's got that Spanish Cuban element. And her brothers end up being little blonde, blue-eyed boys. So even within the family, there's like this, she sort of stands out. She sort of doesn't belong within her own family in a way. She doesn't look like anybody else in the family. And in fact, over time, as she gets older, she would speak and write in French, and the brothers would speak and write in Spanish. So the little blonde, blue-eyed boys speak Spanish. She, who kind of looks Spanish, speaks French. Just a very strange kind of situation. She's speaking French in Berlin, right? So it's very difficult for Nin to find a home, I guess you could say, right? Couple other little notes. Now, Joaquin's career does not go well, and because it doesn't go well, he starts to take it out on the children. And now here's where I'm going to read my first little bit from the biography. This is a great biography by this is a banger of a biography by Deirdre Baer, just called Anaïs Nin, a biography, but it's sort of the definitive one. Now, there is, since Nin is, maybe the most famous of all diarists, there is no end to Nin writing about her own life. Mm-hmm. The trick to that is it's not always quote unquote true.
It's literary. It's literary. Yeah. Right? I can't think of another, who would be another diarist that would be of the same caliber.
On her level, like the amount, just the volume. I'm not sure there is anybody, though she had somebody later, she made a lot of enemies. She made a lot of friends too, but she made a lot of enemies. One of her sort of enemies would later in life refer to it as her liary. Because, which I quite like, just because it's like it's often self-aggrandizing, we're going to get more into the diaries, but some of it is the most self-indulgent thing you can imagine.
I remember one Goodreads reviewer said that basically her diary consists of like stating how important she is to everyone's life around her. So that's like a good
but then something like World War II happens and it like doesn't get mentioned. Like huge historical events happen around her and like it never shows up.
I hate to say it, typical woman.
Gio.
World politics, her own autistic interest in something doesn't matter. But my own immediate life. No, I'm kidding.
Okay,
but maybe, unless. But maybe
she's. It sounds like she's in. Okay, quick, walk it back. She's. She sounds like she's in. What's the name of your podcast, Gio? Where can people find you?
Content minded. Yeah.
Content minded. Go talk to her. No, she sounds like a person who's kind of.
Oh, you mean the other one? Oh yeah.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Right. Yeah. No. Like an Escher. She's like in her own.
True.
House of Mirrors kind of a situation.
And she kind of refers to this, and the best way that I could describe it, she will refer to this thing that she calls like the dream or living in the dream, and it is this sort of like self-constructed realm inside of her head that where things in the real world do pass into it, but they get distorted once they're in there, and things from in there pass out into the real world. It is like an Escher labyrinth inside of her head that she really is where she actually lives, right? And there's rootless cosmopolitan. Where does she find home? Inside of her own head. I mean, there's a certain logic to that, I suppose.
Millions must die. It does not concern me. Millions dying does not concern me.
Oh yeah, and the Great Depression. She does refer to like things being hard now, but like there's no connection to it being part of a thing that's happening, right? It's just like, oh, Hugo's not making money anymore. I don't get it. Yeah. Oof. So let's we're gonna talk a little bit about. So what I was saying was when she's a child, Joaquin, the father, starts to abuse the children primarily because his career is not going well. He's a bit of a boozer too, so he's a sort of a passionate guy. He expects the finer things. He thinks he's a genius. Things are not going well, and he's got a bunch of annoying children running around who he may not even have wanted, to be honest. So, here we go. Here's from the Bear biography. Joaquin was fond of spanking. Usually he withdrew in silence from the ordinary daily life of his family, closeting himself in his study or hiding behind a book at mealtime. The children behaved normally, if a bit more quietly, during such moods. It was only when they heard the start of a venomous criticism of their mother and themselves that they tried to creep out of sight. Unfortunately, his snide comments and vitriolic outbursts usually caused the strong-willed Rosa, Nin's mom, to retaliate with equal intensity. This provoked him to exert his control over the threshold by locking the children in their bedrooms and beating her. When he realized how indomitable her spirit was, he devised a more extreme form of cruelty, locking up Rosa first, then walloping the three children so that her frantic screams intermingled with and punctuated their cries. Joaquin made the children march up to the dark and frightening attic, paddling them as they mounted the stairs with a hairbrush, a cane, or the flat of his hand. All right, it wasn't long before this abuse turned into sexual abuse of Nin. All right, so here's
I'm gonna stop you here. We've done I don't know how many core episodes now, well into the 30s. We've covered 30 artists at this point. We're getting ready to go into season 3, 2023. The trailer's on the website. Brad did a bang up job with that. We track, there is a through line to Art of Darkness. And it's not just glib jokes. We're looking at artists and we're looking at history. It's really an arts history podcast. And I'm just reminded now how common this was. This was more the norm than not.
Oh yeah.
Until recently, across cultures.
And like our parents' generation, most of them got beaten to some degree.
Oh yeah.
Yes. Yep. Just worth thinking about. That's not to just. I mean, I'm not justifying.
No,
it,
it's just that's a fact.
It's just a fact.
So, like I said, eventually this abuse turns into sexual abuse of Nin. Now, it's tricky. Well, we're going to get into it, right? We're going to talk more about how the long-term implications of this are in the After Dark, but we're going to talk about, the childhood part right now. And this is Nin talking in her diary. My father has taken me up to the little attic room to spank me. He takes my pants off. He begins to hit me with the palm of his hand. I feel his hand on me, but he stops hitting me and he caresses me. Then he sticks his penis into me, pretending to be beating me. Oh, I enjoy it. I enjoy it. In and out, in and out. With my ass exposed, my pants down, he takes me from behind, but my mother is coming up the stairs. We have no time. I clutch at him, palpitating. Oh, my mother is coming up the stairs. My father's hands are on my ass. Hot. I'm wet. I'm eager. Open, close. I must feel him all before she comes. I must shoot quickly. I only remember with sureness a time I wept so much he didn't have the courage to beat me. So,
whoa,
that's roll credits.
Yeah.
Let me just slowly back away here. I think I had known about this. This might have been one of the reasons I repressed any knowledge of her.
Yeah, I started reading that and I kind of didn't want to read the rest of that excerpt, to be honest.
Yeah.
And here's the thing. So that's happening, according to Nin, and probably was actually happening. And then at the same time, Joaquin would be verbally abusive to her. He called her like the ugly duckling kind of thing because she was a little weird. She looked unusual in the family, and she was kind of sickly also. So she would get called like the ugly duckling, the ugly one, and that sort of thing.
Being sickly in childhood is a very common theme with all literary people.
Oh, it really is.
Nietzsche, come on. I mean, that's...
Yeah.
My favorite painter, Edvard Munch. Come on, you know.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, Kevin, you go.
Not at all. No, I didn't know about Munch. But yeah, this is one of those we're thinking at some point, it's a bit of a joke, but we're going to have to make an Art of Darkness bingo card because there are these recurring themes, and childhood illness is very common.
Have you done an Edvard Munch episode?
No, but it seems like
that could be a giant Geo return right there.
Okay, all right.
Okay, maybe season 4. I like it. Good. We got you. We got. Brad. I got to tell you. I got to remind you, man. This is Art of Darkness. You got to try to find the dark stuff here, man. I don't know.
I know. I'm looking. Unfortunately,
you can't find it anywhere, right? Yeah.
But I think. But a serious point, I think, would be when it comes to her childhood experience. And I believe Joaquin leaves after, right? Like when she was 9 years old. Yeah. So abandonment comes out over and over again, but we'll get to that when we talk about Joaquin. But in terms of her literary output, there was this one story within her 2 volumes of erotica, the one being Delta Venus, which I think is the superior one. Also the title as well. Something about it just seems so...
Yeah. Oh, she's got good titles. She's got good titles for the most part. Yeah.
Something about it, like Delta Venus, right? But it's erotic, but it's Apollonian at the same time. So, there you go. That's the point. Her eroticism could be sort of a feminine Apollonianism in that it's very calculated. It's very sensual at sometimes, but it's more of when we get to her description of generally the men that she depicts. I'll get into it, but the one I wanted to bring up was called the Hungarian, or what is it called? The Hungary or Hungarian Adventure?
Hungarian Adventure.
Hungarian Adventure, yes. That one, and that later inspires Matilda. I know it's Matilda, but it's like the way it's spelled, right?
With an H, yeah.
Which I'll bring up later as probably one of her most significant short stories. But
good.
The Hungarian Adventure, the theme of child abuse comes up. Can we say the P word?
Yeah, why not?
Okay, there you go. Yeah, because usually I say cheese pizza because I'm on YouTube as well, so it's like I can't say it. But really, it comes up where go ahead.
Yeah. How are we going to cover Burroughs or Ginsberg?
Yeah,
we're not.
When Ginsberg is a part of NAMBLA.
Totally. And you can still buy Howl at Barnes and Noble along with your next to Harry Potter. So I don't know what that is, but yeah.
Oh anyway. God, yeah. But it's funny because in the Hungarian Adventure, essentially he's kind of like Joaquin, a man pinned down by his family, but is consumed by like a rapacious eroticism that leads into pedophilic acts through its veracity and its never-ending nature.
Yeah, it's like an appetite that's so big that it has to come to that at some point. Yeah,
and then it's an appetite that becomes an egregore that influences other people, including Matilda in the story. But there's this one scene where basically he diddles his family and he moves on from his wife to his kids, and it really just. But I think that the one thing with Nin is that she was really the first to put into paper in her diaries the sort of very disturbing reality of a lot of child abuse victims where, especially women, they do feel some sense of identification and satisfaction because they cannot, in their very shattered world, and I know this is pop psychology 101, but like in their very shattered world, they cannot equate the difference between a genuine and healthy eroticism and abuse. That becomes one and the same. So her saying that she sought out her father and the pleasure of being beaten and her exposed ass and getting wet, it's like, that is classic. I mean, it does come off as like, for, you know, French New Extreme Desauvre type of stuff. But I think it's important as just a character study into the mind of a lot of those unspoken things with abuse victims, especially female abuse victims. But
right. Yeah. And yeah, no, I think that's exactly right. It's like, that's the perspective at it then, but like the deep damage that does to the development of a healthy development of a psyche is like, that's not what she's not aware of that at that moment. Right. Yeah. It's dark. So something else happens when she's about 9 years old, 1912, which is the sexual abuse stuff is happening. She also has a burst appendix, right? And this is in this time, 1912 or whatever, you die from that. Usually that's a terminal thing. If it actually burst, you're dead. She manages to live, but she's in the hospital for 3 months straight. And all this time that her father had been sort of spitting vitriol at her, beating her, sexually abusing her, he becomes incredibly tender towards her, right? So he's showering her with love because he honestly thinks she's gonna die. Both of her parents think that she's gonna die, and it's so bad. She gets so sick that throughout her life, she would think that her surviving it was some kind of miraculous anointment, right? It was like, I was chosen somehow by this. That's why I survived, right? It got that serious. And so she's able to see that there's this tremendous tenderness in her father, but it only comes out in this certain time, this certain moment, right? So now it's something that you can pursue, is that thing is in there, right? But the next
sounds
year,
like, hang on, he sounds like a classic narcissist.
Oh, he's an absolute narcissist. Yeah, for sure. I mean, I don't, you don't know if he got diagnosed, but he's got literally every sign of it. Yeah.
Okay. Wow.
The next year, 1913, he's again trying to pursue his career interest. He gets some kind of concert situation lined up, and he ends up moving to Arcachon on the Atlantic coast of France, and they're put up by the owner of the Romeo and Juliet cigar company. And
those are I smoked those cigarillos.
Oh, you do? Oh, okay.
Oh, yeah. I might stop now.
No, it's fine. I mean, they didn't.
I'm gonna change my brand. I don't know if I approve. Well, I'm just kidding.
Romeo and Juliet is canceled. Now here's the thing. She's like, I think 16 or 17 years old. She's 16 years old, daughter to the Romeo and Juliet, the people. And Joaquin sees her and is transfixed and has to be with her. And so he ends up abandoning the Nin and Rosa and the whole family to be with this very young woman, right? He disappears and he writes them a letter. I'm gonna read this a little bit. No one heard from Joaquin until a month after he left, and then it was Rosa to whom he sent a cold, perfunctory letter saying he had removed everything of value from the Uccle house. That's where they were staying in Archicon, and that his abandonment was permanent. He avoided any mention of divorce and advised her to go to Barcelona and live with his parents. Although he would not provide financial support, he would, he said, write from time to time, instructing her on how to bring up the children. Right? So, like, could you imagine, like, writing that letter, disappearing, middle of the night, writing that letter, saying, listen, you go stay with my parents who you don't really know and who don't really like you. I'm not going to help out in any way, but I will occasionally check in with you to make sure you're raising the children the way that I think you should.
Yeah.
Like just a complete narcissist. And by the way, I've run off with a 16-year-old girl. So, you deal with it.
But notice how the sort of psychological and not to psychologize, because I think to psychologize, I mean, there's always limitations to it, but it's important when it comes to Anaïs Nin because her work of art is herself in a lot of ways. So unlike, in similar way, I would think Monk would be, because here's what the connection here. So you have the various extremes in childhood of abandonment. Well, sorry, no, before that, sickliness, being considered the ugly duckling, but seeking sexual approval from her father as well. So you have the sort of archetypal connection between the masculine, which is derelict, which is burdensome, but at the same time standoffish and cold. So you have this constant need for approval, but the sexual element of it intensifies it. But also you have, and this is why I think it's studying the this is, I know it's going to be a joke, but studying the fem cell is very important, because this is why I think Anaïs Nin is very popular among aging millennial MFA grads, because the fem cell has a lot of similar characteristics of, at one point, being considered not conventionally attractive, but then taking on a sexuality, which is a hypersexualization of life, but also then later in life being abandoned by that fatherly figure, that source of meaning. And then this awakens Anaïs Nin to then become this, like, I'm a powerful woman, I don't need no man. The men in my life are basically playthings for my own sexual id. And so it's a very consuming Electra complex. It is a feminine energy, is a sexual feminine eroticism that is very distinct and different from what has been portrayed throughout literature and art and history. And so Edvard Munch would be the incel tag team to that, because of him experiencing sickliness in his youth. But even just to read from her, this is, I believe she wrote this in the 70s, or no, actually maybe in the 80s. This is the first essay from In Favor of Sensitive Men and Other Essays. This is Eroticism in Women. This quote in particular, where is it here? She talks about the Kama Sutra and in the role of women, and how a woman's eroticism is uniquely tied to their environment, unlike men's. It's teased out. It's very central. So this is where she's talking about her critic, how she wrote about how they thought my diary with Henry Middle was pornographic. How dare they?
What are you doing, Minnie Mouse there?
Yeah, I know. Well, she probably.
Yeah.
So this
she had a Minnie Mouse voice, but with a French accent.
Did she?
So. Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
So another passage from Spy, he caresses her so delicately they were almost like teasing an evanescent challenge which she fears to respond to. It might vanish. Her fingers teased her and withheld as they had aroused her. Her mouth teased her and then eluded her. So a lot of her erotica, as we'll get into, is about the permeation of the body in the erotic experience. But this is the quote. And of course, she despises Marlon Brando for making Last Tango in Paris, which is one of the most based and red-pilled, curmudgeon, borderline sexual abuse films has ever been put to celluloid. So she lay unconscious of the wild little cries of the uttered alas. She felt the soft butt of him with her staring. Then she talks about it was disillusionment in our modern times to discover that women courting each other did not necessarily adopt more sensuous, more subtle ways of winning desire, but proceeded with the same aggressive, direct attack as men. So as much as she is a feminist icon, she does realize that female sexuality is of a caliber different than, what does my good friend Catherine call it? 2000s, 2010 sexual, sex posy girl bossism, of course. But she's the development though of the girl boss. So personally, this is why I believe the brutal language says Marlon Brando uses the Last Tango in Paris far more affecting women repulses her. It disparages, vulgarizes sexuality. It expresses only how the Puritans saw it as low, evil, and dirty. It is a reflection of Puritanism. It does not arouse desire. It bestializes sexuality. I find most women object to that as a destruction of eroticism. Among ourselves, we have made the distinction between pornography and eroticism. Pornography treats sexuality grotesquely to bring it back to the animal level. Eroticism arouses sensuality with this need to animalize it. So, of course, she's, basically talking about this sort of like, eroticism for her is integrating the feminine into something that is, sensuality is something that is a higher act. But unfortunately, I think throughout her life, she also demonstrates that personally, sexuality to her became a bestial thing. It became sort of having a power over men. And this unconsciously comes out in her eroticism, where it's about capturing that power over other men, and the way that she depicts men as being weaker and dependent and effeminate and soy jackish.
And she would get some grief. We will get to it. She would get some grief
Yeah.
from the feminist movement at one point in the 60s, 70s, where like she was initially celebrated. And then there was like a rereading of her at some point. They're like, wait a second. You're just a terrible person.
Yeah.
Like, hold on. Did you read page 37? Because she, you know, it was like they took a second look at her. Were like, oh man, maybe you're not on our side, really.
But to go into that, this is what she says: men often physically present, mentally preoccupied, men led by their ambitions. Women are more capable. Of turning away from her work to give full attention to a weary husband and a child's scratched finger. If a woman had witnessed the father going away because of his work, they will retain anxiety about their own going away to meeting, conferences, lectures. So again, this is basically a jab at her father. For the new woman and new man, I highlighted those: new woman and new man. The art of connecting and relating separate interests will be a challenge. And then, of course, she says it's striking that women are out breaking away and separating, carries with it an aura of loss, as if a symbolic umbilical cord still affected all of her emotional life. So she's talking about the new womanhood breaking away from those quote unquote patriarchal norms. And she's writing this basically at the height of the second wave. And she's talking about how in a woman's pursuit of subjectivity, there still is those sort of lingering connections that leads to a preoccupation with loss. And of course, she has a very derelict and cavalier view of family life. I mean, when we get to her abortion, that's probably, I could read a passage from that as well.
No, we're going to talk about that.
So dad went out for cigarettes and never came back.
Never came back.
Essentially.
Yes.
But this goes into the loss of that basically carried throughout her whole life, and the fact that she did treat men like basically sex objects. So
we're gonna talk about the levels to that, how deep that gets.
I got one thing to say about that.
Go ahead.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yes. Oh, man.
Yeah. Well, hold on. Wait till you see.
Slow down.
Kevin,
okay,
wait till
maybe
you
not.
see who was footing the bill. So hold on.
Okay.
Okay. So,
all right.
Not long after, so the family, dad goes out. He tells him to move to and stay with his family, and they do that for a little while until Rosa can't hack it anymore. She decides that she's going to go to New York, take the children with her. She's got some of her sisters there who are doing pretty well for themselves. They still have the Danish merchant family money. She's going to go to New York. Now, on the trip to New York is when the diary, Nin starts writing her diary. Later on in life, go ahead, Kevin.
Put me in time. What year are we?
Oh, yeah. We are in 1913. Oh, sorry, 1914. 1914.
So very similar to the time that Crowley was over in New York, interestingly.
Yeah,
I'm just trying to place her in time.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder. That's probably... Well, her view of sexuality, I think, does lead to a Crowleyan element. I mean, it's funny. I had a very negative experience with the Lemites when I was on Follow the Rules. That's a joke. Follow the rules, break the rules. We had a Crowley stream, and it was with this woman who's this airhead TikToker that's a plagiarist. I think she got her book deal hacked, cut to pieces because of plagiarism. And she attacked us, because we were talking about the occult. And never trust Crowleyites. But here's what I mean, though. So, as much as I do appreciate Anaïs Nin for her open view of eroticism, you do have to realize that, the sexy in vogue politics of sexual liberation at this time. So this is at the end of eroticism in women. The true liberation of eroticism lies in accepting the fact that there are millions facets to it, a million forms of eroticism, a million objects to it, situations, atmospheres, and variations. We have, first of all, to dispense with guilt and guilty consciousness, cementing its expansion, then remain open to its surprises, varied expressions, and to add my personal formula for full enjoyment of it. Of course, adding your personal formula to it. Fuse it with individual love and passion for a particular human being. Mingle it with dreams, fantasies, and emotions. And of course, House of Incest is all about that, her prose work. But I think that as much as I agree with that sentiment, I think that sentiment nowadays in the hands of academics and the post-Tumblr crowd and those people with flags and pronouns in the bio on Twitter, that this is sort of a very destructive notion, because yes, it is true. There are a variety and flourishings of eroticism that are situatedness, but nowadays there's so much of a focus on fetishism becoming identity that she really is in some ways the precursor to that, fetishism becoming an identity. So, but she doesn't mean it that way, but I'm saying that in the hands of people nowadays, that
it gets flattened, it gets squashed, it gets like,
exactly.
yeah.
But she's very right, though. There's many forms of eroticism. There's many expressions to it. That's not an inherently bad thing. I mean, of course, no, I'm a base trad, return to tradition,
missionary for procreative purposes only.
That's it. There you go.
Yeah, for sure.
Not naturally November.
Not naturally
November.
Back.
Not naturally November. Cream pie or die, exactly. No birth control, never.
Not even once.
I said that so many times on, like, I do the show with Prudentialist, Digital Archipelago, and we were talking about that one tweet that our good friend Starbard made, where I think it was when Vader Ginsburg died, or no, it was the overturning of Roe. He's like, anime girls would never even think of having an abortion.
Oh God.
Oh my God.
Unreal.
Anime girls are returned to tradition. I mean, Anaïs Nin would be so against anime. It would be incredible. She would say that anime is male fetishism through and through.
Oh yeah, she definitely would. Yeah.
Where are we going? We're trying to be serious, literary men of letters, and we're talking about.
This is great.
This is very interesting. I'm enjoying this. Yeah.
All right, I'm gonna get us back on the bio for
back on track.
Right,
back on the bio.
Back on the train.
Yeah. So okay, so she's on the boat to New York, and this is when the diary starts. Now, the diary actually starts as a letter to her father. That's how it begins. She wants to write a letter to her father, never gets sent, and it sort of transmogrifies into this diary that she's going to carry with her everywhere throughout her life. Basically, her life happens as much in the diary as it does outside in the, quote unquote real world. But there was something very interesting that she wrote in a very early entry that I think is a good picture of where her mind was as a child. She said, "I'm going to tell my diary a secret. I have made a resolution not to have any friends and not to be attached to anyone outside of my family. One can't be sure of staying anywhere. And if one leaves, there's too much sadness." Right. So, it's one thing to say like rootless cosmopolitanism and the effects of it. But then you think, you're talking about a 13 or 11-year-old girl who's leaving home. She apparently thought when you were going to America, she thought it was going to be like cowboys and Indians. That was her picture of America when she was on the boat. And so, it's and her father has abandoned her within the last year. It's a very difficult time. It would be for anybody. It's a challenging time. Rosa, once they get there, Rosa becomes a sort of like girl boss entrepreneur, is like buying up property and renting it out and like, making some moves business-wise. Vocal coaching because she was a singer. She eventually gets into, Rosa does, her mother, Nin's mother, gets into shopping in stores in New York for rich Cubans, including the wife of the president of Cuba. So she's like the personal shopper for the elite of Cuba.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, it's kind of interesting. Now, eventually the Cuban economy takes a dive and this whole thing falls apart and she's left with a bunch of money that unpaid and it turns into a whole thing. But Nin is constantly one step or 0 steps away from like the real thing happening, right? The famous people, the powerful people. She's always sort of right outside of it, even as a child, right? Even though the child, they don't even necessarily have that much means or status in society. She's still somehow kind of right there. In this time too, this move to New York, Nin she hates school. She's stubborn. She's, lazy in terms of school, at least. And here's something her mother does that's kind of awful. Everything bad about it, Anaïs, like being lazy in school, her attitude, whatever, she refers to that as the nin in you. Or she says like, "Oh, you're being a nin right now."
Oh,
that's nin coming out.
Father's side, yeah.
That is a bad thing to do to a kid.
Yeah,
it really is. Yeah.
Ooh.
And it's funny that Nin keeps that name though. She could have used any one of her 19 names in her publishing record, right?
Yeah.
She keeps that name. Even when she gets married later, she keeps the Nin name.
It's like the Crowley's mother calling him Beast 666. You gotta be careful. Yeah.
But that's significant though. I mean, to keep the Nin name is essentially a way of detouring her own helplessness at the face of her domineering but then absent father. That's sort of
right
taking up that trauma. She's taking up the trauma the way that it's so popular nowadays, but in a real way though. And that propels her literary career forward as well.
Absolutely. Now she hits 16. She gets a few poems published in a magazine, and she uses this to convince her mother that she doesn't need to go to school anymore. Mom, I'm going to be a big writer. I don't need the school business. Who cares? Like, just let me drop out. And her mother, right or wrong, lets her drop out of school. Right. So she doesn't graduate high school. She's for a few years, the agreement is she can drop out of school as long as she does work around the house, right? But she doesn't. She is Anaïs Nin for a couple of years, not really doing anything except writing in her diary. And this becomes this sort of like, this is where it starts to become incredibly self-indulgent. It's a minute analysis of every single thing that happens to her. And then later on, it morphs and evolves into something different. But at least at first, it's like, this is what happened today. This is what I think of it. This is what it means. This is what they think it means. Like, it's just, she's writing, it's like a 1-to-1 map of her life, like, and I just can't imagine.
Just your average poster on Twitter. Here's a ham sandwich.
Real neat aristocracy, but a femcel neat.
Yeah.
That's very interesting. Micro documenting her life like a typical schizo poster. Like,
right.
My God, it's amazing.
Here's a Spotify link.
Right. Yeah, there were Tumblr accounts that did this. There were Tumblr femcel neats that did. She was the godmother of every Tumblr, mentally ill, neat woman who wrote about her life.
You do realize, Gio, we're speaking a dialect. You understand that.
It's true. Live journal.
It's a very online podcast.
I hate that I understand everything you just said.
The live journal femcel, calculating and every little detail of her life, categorizing it. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Now, amazing. Here's the other thing too. She becomes, I think, partially because she can in the diary can imagine scenarios and play things out ahead of time and afterwards and all of this. She starts to lie a lot. This is the other thing. We're going to see this, Kevin. She is the biggest liar of everyone we have covered by far. She may have told
even
more
Crowley.
Individual. Yeah, even more than Crowley.
Really?
She may have told more lies than any individual who's ever lived. So I wouldn't be. She's in it. She's getting Guinness, I think. And here's where a big one happens when she's around 16. I'm gonna just read this from the Bayer biography again. Actually, Nin lied frequently. Some of them were merely tales told to keep from being scolded. Others were truly bizarre, such as the one that haunted her for the rest of her life. This woman, Anaïs Sanchez, at the Waldorf Astoria school, where with her children Kuka and Eduardo, invited Anaïs Nin to join them at the theater. Anaïs was detained on her way to the Queen Station and arrived in Manhattan later than expected, but still early enough for the performance. When the cousins asked what delayed her, Anaïs could not tell the truth, mundane as it was. She said, "My imagination was there, my poor father's greatest fault and my heritage. What made me lie? I don't know. The lie was truly a whopper. She invented a railroad strike with angry workers stopping the train, breaking windows, and beating the conductor. Her imagined adventure was replete with blood, noise, and violence, and everyone believed her. Astonished at her own creativity, she felt a double surge of power. Not only could she invent such a fantastic story, she could make people believe it. 40 years later, she still marveled that quote, the power of the spirit is frightening for miracles, for creation, and for destruction." So at this point, she's lying. She doesn't even really know why she's lying. It's just like, it can't. She started to lose the distinction, I think, between the dream in her head and the actual world. I think they became coextensive with each other.
That's a great way to live. If you can pull that off and manage, that is
no, you're right.
Awesome. Yeah. Very hard to sustain, however.
Oh, of course. Mm-hmm. Now, as time goes on, the family fortune sort of disappears a little bit, right? They had the money from the rich Danish merchant stuff, and then Rosa her mother had been making some money, and that all started to kind of fall apart, right? And she decides she wants to continue her education, and she actually gets into Columbia. I don't even understand how you get into Columbia when you don't finish high school. Times are different, obviously.
Columbia or Barnard? She got into Columbia.
Apparently Columbia. This is what the biography says.
Yeah,
I don't really know the ins and outs of it. This is what the biography says. She was allowed to enroll, a dean told her that she was not emotionally mature enough to take classes like philosophy or psychology. When she eventually leaves, she says that the only thing she learned was composition, grammar, French, and boys.
Whoa. That's kind of like that Sam Hyde bit. Remember, he's like, you know what young girls do in college? Woo! It's like, with a lot of hot guys. Then by the time they get to second year, oh my God, I haven't picked a major yet. Woo!
Right.
Oh, that's brutal.
All right, so let me give you.
The university system in the United States is an institutional Rumspringa.
It is.
That's what it is by design.
And you kind of understand there is a little bit of a need for that. It's just the question of whether it's the right to pair it with.
Sure, and you know what I mean. Spend $50,000 a year for it,
right? To just have.
I made the mistake of paying attention to my studies in university. I should have been.
And look what it got you.
I know, eh? Oh my God. This is actually a passage from her reflecting about this biographical part of her life up until now. So this is from On Truth and Reality, which she actually attended psychotherapy with Otto Rank, the famous, hire to Freud, but only for a few months. Yeah, because I mean, Otto Rank got a little too close to the truth. But she says this creative will sometimes manifests itself very early on in life. At the age of 9, I was in danger of losing my life. A doctor made a mistake diagnosis and said I had tuberculosis of the hip and would never walk again. My instant reaction was to ask for a pencil and paper, begin to make written portraits of my whole family, to write poems. I even put in the front page of my member of the French Academy, which to me seemed to highest honor awarded to a writer. Talk about surgery, so forth. It was a dramatization of the artist's solution to the obstacles of life. That's very important. So basically, this is why she can't stop lying. She can't stop eating hot chips and lying. So I was dramatized with the artist's solution. I can't help myself. All of my life, I've talked to and written a great deal about the artist. It was often misunderstood as a cultist, excluding non-artists and uncreative people, but that was not so. I love non-artists as well, but for me, the artist simply means one who can transform ordinary life into a beautiful creation with a craft. But I did not mean creation strictly applied only to the arts. I meant creation in life, the creation of a child, a garden, a house, a dress. I was referring to creativity in all its aspects. Then to carry on, she says, by the human condition particularly applied to women in her training for devotion, service, loyalty to her personal world. I started with the usual handicaps, which I share with so many: the broken home, the uprooting to a strange country whose language I did not know. Everything contributed to the creating an alienated child. I found it extremely difficult to enter the flow of life, difficult and painful, because there was always double struggle, which Dr. Rank describes in Truth and Reality, the conflict between being different and wanting to be close to others. I felt different, but I longed for friendship and love. The struggle to maintain my difference was accentuated by the cultural contrast and uprooting the problem of language. So this goes to the heart, and she admits this, and this is not Anaïs Nin, the literary figure. This is Anaïs Nin, the essayist, which is important because it's her sort of subtly reflecting on her life in those conditions that created this, noxious cauldron that did produce, a great artist. But at the same time, you can see this blending of how uprootedness and these sort of traumas earlier on in life contributed to this blending of reality and fiction. And so when we do get to House of Incest, that is all about viewing even the most mundane situations imbued with this creative will that she constantly refers to throughout all of her life, up until her deathbed, in fact. So
yeah, absolutely. No, that was great. That was
That
great.
is my honest take on her. That is my charitable take on her.
Yeah. No, and I think that's very fair and insightful. We're gonna see too. Well, I can't wait till we get to what she called the trapeze. That was her life for many years. But I want to give a picture of her at this age when she's sort of at Columbia. This is like the early 1920s, right? This is from the Bear biography again. Anaïs was pencil thin, the look to which fashionable American women aspired in the 1920s. She had a crown of thick brown hair, a creamy complexion, and her hazel eyes could change disarmingly from blue-green to yellow-brown. She had never lost the trilled Spanish-French R, which gave her English pronunciation a hint of a slightly exotic lisp. Among Rosa's European friends were musicians who serenaded Anaïs, poets who said her beauty inspired them, and painters who wanted her to pose. For a while, her look was like the look, right, that people wanted. And she would become an artist model. She even at one point was painted by the illustrator Charles Dana Gibson for a cover of the Saturday Evening Post. And this was before she had anything like a writing career, right? I mean, this isn't sustainable, but she was strikingly attractive in a somewhat unorthodox way when she was, a young woman. She didn't look like every other woman, but she would turn heads for sure. She didn't know how.
Rockwell's publication, by the way, Saturday Evening Press.
I don't know if Rockwell did it. I know Rockwell did a lot of covers for it. Yeah.
That was his main.
And it was a big deal. I mean, there was a lot of fiction and stuff in there too. For a while, that was a good way to get paid if you were a writer and when you used to be able to sell fiction. Now in 1921, she meets this guy, Hugh Parker Guyler. I'm not sure exactly how it's it, who went by Hugo. This guy's about 3 years older than her. He's tall, handsome, very outwardly masculine kind of guy, especially when he was younger, who was also a little bit of a poet, right? He had a kind of a sensitive side for sure. He had an artistic side. We're going to talk about his artistic career as well at some point, a little bit, because it's worth mentioning. He'd actually graduated from Columbia, had a BA in English literature and economics. And when they met, he was being ushered into this training program for the National City Bank of New York. He was a banker and a poet. And they kind of had this odd relationship. When it first started, Hugo's father didn't want him to be involved with Anaïs because she was Catholic, right? And that didn't go over so hot.
The one true faith.
Right.
Yeah, exactly.
I have to say,
Exactly.
indeed.
Boom,
Yeah,
boom.
Gio. There you
go. Hugo would essentially disavow his family and convert to Catholicism to be with her. Now, the disavowal kind of faded and the family kind of came back together. But at first it was like, you know what? Fine. I don't care. I'm going to be with this.
All is forgiven. She snared a soul for Christ.
Right.
Mission accomplished.
Right.
Oh, she did so many un-Catholic things. It's so
my God.
Oh my
her
God.
whole life. She's the
right.
Catholic.
She was
actually
Catholic.
Right.
Catholic girl. Catholic girl.
Right. Sure. Yeah.
Right.
Air quotes.
Their favorite thing to do together, the two of them, was to read each other's. They wrote in a common journal that was like a diary, and then they would like sit around and read bits to each other. It's very romantic in a way, right? And then eventually Nin kind of took that journal over. Like, at first it's sort of 50-50, you can imagine. Then like over time, it's Hugo. Eventually Hugo gets kind of elbowed out of his own common journal, right? And it's all about Nin.
Of course.
That's my plan for the podcast, Brad. Once we reach takeoff, let me just
once you get the Peter Thiel money, there you go.
The Thiel bucks.
Your mic's not working. Brad, your mic's not working.
Let me see here. Can I
we'll just do it anyway.
Can I mute Brad? There you go. Here we go. Good luck, buddy.
Oh my God! He did it.
Oh, okay, all right. I'll let you back.
When I was muted by Lev, I knew that was the end. By the way, so I left the night I left. So there you go.
Yeah.
Oh my God,
man. So okay, so let me roll a couple other things. These are important aspects of her. So before she gets married, Rosa doesn't know what to do with her because she's not in education. She doesn't know how to have a job. She can't even clean a house. So there's a thought for a while that she should become a Cuban debutante. Rosa has all these connections in the Cuban elite, right? She shops for all these people. She can get her into Cuba and put her out as a debutante. There's even a point where she's a picture of a young Anaïs is in a Cuban newspaper, in a newspaper in Havana, as like presenting her to the public to possibly be married off.
Whoa.
Cuban debutante sounds like a great sandwich.
It does.
Yeah.
What year was this, by the way?
This would have been the early 20s, so like 22, 21.
Was Batista there? This was like way after. I'm assuming that
Cuban history is kind of bad.
Yeah. I'm assuming that a pro-American regime was there at the time.
It had to have been
because of the ban. Because the Marines went into the Philippines and other places. So I'm assuming that Latin America was firmly under the control of the nascent American empire. But no, I mean, America was quite isolationist at this time. But I'm assuming that later on with the Batista regime, I don't know. Did she ever talk about communism at all? That's one thing.
Barely. She pretended she was sympathetic for a while because she was shipping a communist, but she didn't really care. It was about other people. Communism is about, anything that's about other people doesn't really matter to her that much. Yeah.
Oh boy.
Okay, so she doesn't obviously get married off as a Cuban debutante. She does get married to Hugo, and it's funny, for all this sexual adventure stuff we're talking about, the erotic life of Anaïs Nin and all that. She had never had sex. She apparently never had sex before marriage, apparently.
Whoa.
And when they did consummate, it did not go well because, first of all, Hugo climaxed instantaneously, and then later on other attempts could not seem to get it up. Nin didn't know enough.
That's pretty based, I must say. Pretty Lindy.
I'm sorry. Man. That's a problem. That's gonna be a problem.
Yeah, for sure. And Nin didn't know enough about how sex was supposed to work to be like, well, what if we try this? Like, she didn't know anything, right? And she also was so squeamish talking about sex that she couldn't even bring anything up. Like, she couldn't say, like, Hugo, what's the matter? Why can't you get it up? Like,
but she writes about it. So
later.
Later.
Yeah.
Okay.
She hasn't had her sexual awakening yet.
I see. Okay, right. Helpful. Okay.
Yeah, so she couldn't even write the word sex in her diary at this point when she gets married to Hugo. She was too squeamish about it. Now, on the other hand, Hugo is financing her and her whole family, right? He's a 23-year-old man, and he's paying for her mother and her two younger brothers to live in New York City in a separate house at one point. Though at times they live together. The ups and downs of the family finances are so crazy that it's impossible to even try to track it. But it's pretty soon that they're kind of living beyond their means, right? He's paying for two households and he's 24. Even if you're like a Wall Street banker, you're fresh out of school, you're not making the big bucks yet, right? It's kind of hard to manage. He starts to kind of work so hard. She was attracted to the sort of poetic side of him, but he's working long hours. He eventually sort of loses that poetic side a little bit because he's focused on business, focused on making a living, and she is proportionally unattracted to him as this happens, right? She wants the poet. She wants him to be rich and a great artist, right? One or the other isn't gonna be good enough.
No.
That is right. The most unrealistic of all kinks that she has, the most extreme kink. Is that
it's like I want a homesteader husband, but he also has to be like a tech CFO,
Right. Exactly. Now, in the midst of this, she decides something that she wants to do, possibly as a bid to get closer to her father, at least sort of spiritually. She decides she's going to become a, quote, Spanish dancer. And becoming a Spanish dancer, what this means is, like, you would go and perform at parties and clubs and things like that. And what this really meant was that Hugo put out a bunch of money to pay for really expensive costumes and lessons, and then Nin kind of like didn't bother to rehearse or like try to get gigs or anything. It was more like it's just Hugo's just shelling out bucks. Now, the other thing is, this is a great comment about it from somebody else from the Bear biography. Her problem was she started too late and did not work nearly hard enough to be a Spanish dancer. And yet Hugo's literally going broke trying to make this happen for her. And this is a common theme throughout their life.
Yeah.
Because all she really cares about is her diary, honestly. That's all she really cares about. Now, she, at this point also in her diaries, because we're about to start the inklings of her sexual awakening, she will write in her diary very early on, before the sexual adventure phase, she will write, "Sex without love, I hate." And when we know her future, that's kind of a ridiculous thing for her to say. But okay. We need to picture her. She's at home. She's supposedly a Spanish dancer, but not really, right? She just has a bunch of costumes. she's got this elaborate home that Hugo has bought, and that she is decorating in a very idiosyncratic style. And the family is hemorrhaging money, even though, Hugo's doing okay, but they're spending every dollar plus that he makes. And then she meets this guy, I think his name is Paco Morales. Okay. And Paco Morales is going to be her dance teacher. Hugo's paying for lessons with this dance teacher. I'm going to read a little passage.
Oh, I've seen this one.
Yeah.
Oh man. Yeah.
I'll only give you a description of the first man that she has extramarital stuff with. Let me give you find this page here. Let's see. Hold on. Page 83. She went with a different name when she was a dancer anyway. And Anita Aguilera, which I think is funny. Morales was 50, small, dark, and shabby. His personal hygiene often made the finicky Anaïs turn up her nose into her scented handkerchief, but his passion was thrilling. And soon she was joining him after class in the basement where costumes were stored. As she stood against the piles of shawls and dresses, Morales knelt before her, lifted her dress, and, quote, kissed my sex until I grew dizzy. Despite his entreaties, Anaïs told the diary she could never, quote, bring myself to go to his hotel room as he begged me to. Right, so this is her first extramarital thing.
No shower bros vindicated. Let those pheromones do their work.
That's right.
Go right from the office to the dance studio to your date. Don't stop home to shower.
Who cares?
Yeah, powerful.
Who cares?
That also comes up in her erotica too. The sort of the very intangible aspects of sexuality. Not that I would know as a true self, but like the scent comes up as a lot. And also, I would point out in Spanish dancing, and her knowledge of like calypso and so forth, and all of these different dance and cultural styles of the Basque. One thing that is persistent, there's this one story in Delta of Venus, what's it called? The Ring, where it's about this brothel in Peru, and this erotic dancer who ends up having live sex shows with these rich, usually plantation owner men. And it seems that the one persistent theme that comes up in her erotica is sort of this fascination with the inherent, I would say, borderline energetic and borderline animalistic eroticism of a lot of quote unquote foreign women that always comes out there describing the dark hue of their skin, their particular sexual bits and so forth. It would almost get her canceled nowadays to sort of place this dark eroticism at the feet of these different peoples, usually in the global south, usually in Latin America and so forth. And, it seems that there is this persistent theme of the sexual excitement of the, other, if you will, that a lot of academics have talked about. And of course, I think that's sort of like the racialized elements of her eroticism is something that often doesn't get talked about by a lot of those, millennial cat lady MFA grads that worship her, for obvious reasons, because it brings up this question of sexuality in, the 19th and 20th century, and this sort of the rise of erotic literature at this time, and how the sort of sexual anxiety, but also the sexual excitement of these other peoples comes into play. And there's a whole, history in feminist and post-colonial studies literature about this as well, this exoticism combined with the erotic.
I mean, is it fair to say there's a sort of a thing where it's like, if you're not attracted to somebody from a different race, you're racist. Yeah. If you are attracted to somebody from a different race, you're also racist.
Yeah. So it's for different reasons. Of course.
Right. But still, the end result is the same. Yeah. Let's describe kind of where she and Hugo are at this point, because poor suffering Hugo, man. Like, I mean, but like, let's just step back for a second and describe the situation being married. If you're Hugo Guler married to Anaïs Nin, okay, she has forced him to convert. He's had to convert to Catholicism and lose his family to be with her. She doesn't care about Catholicism. She thinks religion is irrelevant, right? So, why didn't she convert to his religion then? I mean, if she doesn't care, right? He paid for her whole family, not just her, to survive, right? Shipped them from America to Paris to kind of be in their same orbit. And he had to kind of and then she blew the rest of his money on the Spanish dancing career, that the only real outcome of it was that she was fooling around with some other man for the first time, right? And then she is like, at the same time, can't get out of her own head enough to even have sex with Hugo, right? So that's the situation 2 years into marriage.
Okay. All right.
Whoa.
Big
right? It's kind of rough, right? Yeah.
Big time. Wait, and but she must have some charisma or some.
She's an attractive woman, and she's got this sort of exotic, mystical, like she's like a manic pixie dream girl kind of.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I can see why she'd be
500 is a bit
yeah. I mean, I could see if you see pictures of her, you could see why she'd be appealing. Like you could see why you'd be in a social situation. You'd be like, oh, what's her deal? Like I can totally see why you would start to get pulled in, right?
Okay.
Okay, here's a quote from the Bear biography. By mid-1928, so she's 25, her feelings for Hugo as lover and confidant were eroding rapidly, and to evade them, she engaged in a frenzy of frivolous social activity for the better part of the year. To decorate their fairy tale apartment on the boulevard, Hugo borrowed against his salary and persuaded his mother to loan him $5,000, which she did with the proviso that he repay her $100 a month at 6% interest. That's like $1,700, right? So times 17 by that year for that year to today's money. Anaïs used $3,000 to turn the apartment into a Moorish Oriental Indian wonderland, and hinted so broadly about wanting a fur coat that cost 1/4 of Hugo's yearly salary that he used the remaining $2,000 from his loan as a down payment. The debts the loan was supposed to erase remained unpaid. So she's basically just blowing all of his money.
Oh my god!
More than all of it. Other people's. She's starting to blow other people's money, right? Yeah, just kind of crazy. Okay, now around this time that I'm reading this, 1928 into 1929, she has a further extramarital affair, and this is with the famed American educator John Erskine. John Erskine is a guy who taught at Amherst and Columbia. He was also the first president of Juilliard. Again. Whoa. Nin is always in contact. She's always right next to like the world happening, right? Like the actual like centers of cultural power or whatever. He's best known for writing something called The Moral Obligation to be Intelligent, which I don't really know what it's about, but I thought that was a funny title. A book that came out in 1915. He'd actually known Hugo from when Hugo was at Columbia. So he's a Hugo's associate, an older man, but he's like maybe Hugo's kind of mentor a little bit. And she tries to seduce him. Nin tries to seduce Erskine, and it ends up being very disappointing. Like Erskine kind of like, it doesn't really come off. He ends up sort of like jerking off on her basically. And then like, and he, you know, he kind of resists, he's like, oh, I could not do that to Hugo. But instead of like actually resisting and like walking away, he like doesn't quite go, he goes halfway. And this is very confusing to Nin. She's like, does he want me? Does he not want me? And she ends up like writing about this for like a year and a half, this whole disappointing affair. But I think this whole thing, the fact that she was able to seduce these two men, this is where the sexual adventurer stuff starts to come out. It's like, oh, those two men are out there. Who else is out there? Like, what else? Both of those things were different. Like Hugo's different. Like this is where her mind starts to wander into like what else can happen sexually out there in the world. So we've talked a little bit about her writing, but we haven't talked about, you know, various bits we've read, but we haven't talked about her in her actual life, sort of in the timeline, her writing. That's because she hasn't really written anything but the diary, right? into the 1920s. She doesn't get she doesn't actually write anything that kind of pops off until this book on D.H. Lawrence. Well, it would become a book later, but it starts out as just a piece. And it's called The Unprofessional Study. D.H. Lawrence was like one of her primary influences, I would say, at least from a craft standpoint. You know, and as people know, D.H. Lawrence is one of these figures who was banned for sort of sexually explicit content. A lot of people accused him of writing smut, essentially.
Later Chaverly's Lover, right? That's
that was the big one. So Nin was very inspired by this and ended up writing first a piece and then later a book that was actually pretty well respected for she didn't have any formal education. She's not an academic, right? She's just an enthusiast and a good reader and a pretty talented writer. Let me read this little bit from the bio. Let's see if I can find it. Oh yeah. Okay. Here, this is a little bit about this. This is a little bit about this D.H. Lawrence thing. Subtitled "An Unprofessional Study," this book is a deeply personal text that tells as much about Nin's theories on everything from psychoanalysis to sex as about Lawrence's. She wrote it during a time of personal crisis when she was subjecting her sexuality to intense scrutiny that would have lasting repercussions. From Hugo and Eduardo is her closeted homosexual cousin who she sort of has a weird flirtatious relationship with, to flirtations with visiting bankers and society ruse, to the pathetic dancing teacher Morales and the teasing homosexual gigolo another Morales, spelled differently. To the passionate strangers she yearned for in daydreams, every relationship in her life was metaphorically balanced on the brink of a bottomless chasm of irrevocable change. Whether the change would result in Laurentian terms in a, quote, strange conjunction, a, quote, star equilibrium, remained to be seen, but Anaïs Nin believed that writing her book would provide answers to her questions. So there's something about, like, in her writing and her few sexual experiences, there's like a festering desire that eventually she has to project into the real world and actually act on. But
Yeah.
it takes her a while to actually get there, right? To sort of push it out into the world.
Yeah. Like it's funny though, her relation to gay men, because I noticed that I don't know, this is pretty controversial. I don't think I should say this. But whatever, this is a hot take. A lot of hypersexual women, they do have this a lot of, I would say, like well-adjusted women are kind of like, on the fence with gay men, because like gay men do tend to have some of them anyways, have a very dismissive attitude towards women. I was talking about this with my friend who is a rad femme. But when it comes to Anaïs Nin, her relation to gay men mixed in with her erotic exploration is quite funny, because there's this one short story in Delta Venus where it's essentially a very sexually active woman getting sexual pleasure off of witnessing two very twinkish gay men go at it. And also there's implied pegging and so forth. So like there's like a domino between her like having, not having sex with her husband that dominoes into writing about pegging and, being exciting about gay men. Because I noticed that there's a certain kind of domineering women that, again, this is very controversial, but the femcel thing when it comes to the relation between media of like, Tumblr shipping, trying to like make male characters gay. They have a fascination with Futanari, which Fujoshi, which Futanari is different. Well, for those who don't know, in anime, Futanari is about gay, twinkish young boys that femcells just love for some reason. There's this, and I talked about this with Helena Kirchner actually on my podcast.
This is news to me. I've never even heard this word before.
A lot of femcells, a lot of women who have a very distinct sexual energy that is frustrated but also hypersexualized, they for some reason cannot get over a particular form of twinkish gay eroticism. This is true. This is studied by academics. So trust me on this. Trust me.
I believe source.
Source. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Gio's been looking at my alt accounts lately.
So it's funny because Anaïs Nin does have this relation to gay men where they are a source of sexual excitement for women who are in turn hypersexualized. And also there's like this weirdo form of rad femme thought where like the picture of the man is sort of like ethereal and twinkish and not your typical burly masculine man, right? And Anaïs Nin writes her characters in almost all of her eroticism as men who are very easily controllable by women, men who are either perfect, who are not masculine in the sense of all of these literary figures that she, the characters written by literary figures that she interacted with throughout her life, in particular Norman Mailer. Like those men are like borderline, I hate to say it, borderline rapey and domineering and crazy, and Hemingway and Mailer, and to a little bit of an extent Henry Miller. These are literary figures that write characters of men that are like literal, like either giga chads or like very like high-minded men who totally disregard the feminine. But Anaïs Nin is writing male characters from at least a borderline feminist perspective, where men are something else. Men are like, I don't know if you know, again, this is totally terminal internet stuff, but this is like the, like the racist rad femmes, right? Like the Hyperborean feminists, as I call them. They have the same picture as men, men being like, I remember one time Rad Femme, what's her name? Rad Femme Austrian painter. We were talking once on Twitter, on the TL. She had this tweet about, like how the perfect man is basically a twink, right? And me, I am not that. Like, look at me, my God, I am not. So I got very offended. I'm like, I said, this is terrible. How dare you? But you could see why there's this linkage between radical feminist thought, at least in some portions, not all portions, and men as more of kind of like the denuded and demure form of sexuality. No longer the woman is demure. Now the man takes on a demure role, and literally all of her erotic stories have men who take on the role. It is women who is leading. It is men who is submitting to the sexual wants and pleasures of women. And this is why there is this connection between the femcel and a particular form of gay eroticism, not the real, 80s bathhouse saliforums form of gay eroticism. This is like, totally twink anime, almost not real gay culture, kind of like this
like exaggerated to the point of being like
that's probably the most online and most epic footnote we've had on Art of Darkness in now well over 50 episodes, so I applaud you. Very, very interesting.
But there's something about a particularly not conventionally attractive women who are hypersexualized that do like have this weird relation to a particular form of gay man. It's like maybe it's because the masculine is no longer threatening in that environment. I don't know.
I think that's an easy explanation for it, and is at least partially true.
You made me think. It makes me think of Bowie. Bowie seems to personify this androgynous. Not that he was the passive actor, but
characters though. He had masculine attributes.
He wasn't adjacent. Well, in any case,
the gender bending, the fact that he was in a way he was a beautiful boy in the Paglian sense, but he certainly had masculine politics. He was very based and secretly red-pilled. So,
well, I can't wait to do the Bowie episode. It's probably going to be in 2024, but yes, awesome, Brad.
Yeah. So, okay. So that's all great. And it's true that Nin had a couple of things. She would often try to seduce homosexual men, and she would, or at least then there's a number of occasions which she did. And she often very much got off on being able to seduce men and thus turn the tables of power in the dynamic. This is like, she didn't even realize this at first, but eventually when she found that she could do it, it was a massive thing for her. And this would often take on like a streak of cruelty. Like she liked to see men squirm, right? And we'll talk a little bit more about that coming up.
Mommy Dommy.
Right. She had a little bit of that. Now, I don't know, that turned into, that would be like situationally, like a man who wasn't going to come for her or had sort of told himself that he wasn't going to fall for it, getting his heart rate to go up, right? Like trying to get him to take that step over.
And you could see why seducing a gay man is very erotic, because you were seducing a man that does not like women.
Right.
Yeah, so that's like the ultimate prize. That's like the scalp,
Absolutely. Now, she comes into contact this early 1930s era. She comes into contact with something that would be highly effective for her and would solve all of her problems, and that would be psychoanalysis. As you can tell, I'm joking. Hopefully,
it didn't mend her mental illness. It produced even greater forms of mental illness.
We're gonna see. Yeah. We're gonna see.
Yeah.
So it started out where she performed sort of psychoanalysis on herself by reading Freud and whatever. Read some Freud, that's fine. But this is interesting. Let me read this bit that she wrote, which was her qualifications for psychoanalysis. I think this was written in 1931. This is a list in her diary. My qualifications for psychoanalysis: preference for listening rather than talking myself. I don't know if that's true. Gift for listening rather than talking myself. Natural habit of analyzing what is told me during and after talk. Exceptional good memory to retain confidences, tones, gestures. Habit of writing down confidences and clarifying them. Habit of brooding over people and spontaneous desire to heal them. Patience. Many proofs of understanding beyond my own experiences. Proof that my mind works naturally in Freud's manner. Intuition. Right. So she wanted to sort of be a psychoanalyst, and we're going to talk a little bit about that. She gets into, so she eventually does find an analyst to take her in as a patient, but it's early days of psychoanalysts. It's not like today. There's not BetterHelp, right? So in the early days, 1930s, basically every psychoanalyst alive has a Wikipedia page now, because there wasn't that many of them.
Yeah.
Right.
The first one that she comes into contact with is this guy named Rene Allende. And Rene Allende, let's see. I think, do I have a little bit on him? So he was there's so many things that now are unethical that this guy does. And there are various other analysts that she has throughout her life. She treats, at one point he's treating both Nin and her husband, and they would often have the same psychoanalyst. Allende diagnoses her cousin Eduardo with homosexuality, because she's analyzing her cousin too. Diagnoses his homosexuality, Eduardo's homosexuality, as stemming from, quote, his unrequited desire to have sex with Nin. He would tell Nin that she should sleep with her cousin Eduardo in order to cure him of homosexuality. Right. So this
is approaching John Money levels.
Right. This is the heights of early 1930s psychoanalysis.
We're going to make our way to Freud at some point on this pod, and I'm sure we'll have lots of opinions about it, but my goodness.
Yeah. Let me read a little bit about him, because he's a fascinating figure. Allende was one of the very first psychoanalysts in France, and one of the 12 founding members of the Paris Society of Psychoanalysis. He was also a homeopath obsessed with the occult and astrology, and the author of more than 20 books, including The Symbolism of Numbers and Capitalism and Sexuality.
I just got to hang on one second.
Yeah.
They're the same picture. Psychoanalysis, it's the same exact thing.
The roots of psychoanalysis come explicitly from a lot of these spiritualist and occult movements in the 19th century. Like, as much as Freud wanted to bury that, and he was an atheist and worshiped science, I mean, his great protege was Arthur Grodek, who was a fucking hypnotist. So Freud employed hypnotism. I mean, Jung more so, because to me, the reason I classify Jung as a perennialist is because his religious studies, and he expanded his scope. He truly was a philosopher and a scholar, whereas Freud was the consummate, well, not really. I mean, the way his ethical practices were not very apt, but he was the consummate clinician, or at least he liked to think he was.
He thought himself was the one.
Yeah. Whereas nowadays in academia, Freud is taken up as a theorist more than anything. So
right.
And Jung is, of course, excluded because for various reasons, but that's another episode for another time.
Yeah, he happens to take God seriously. It's part of it.
And also, I mean, they try to accuse him of being a fascist and all that, but
of course, you just get to apply that to anybody you don't like. So that's easy.
Although he did say that the Austrian painter had very effeminate handwriting. He was very cautious and effeminate. So
interesting.
God, very interesting. We have reached a point on this podcast where we're getting hate from all sides. So
I know. Who are you going to piss off?
Yep, everybody. Yep, it's good. We love you. We love you all. We love you all. It's all good.
Boy.
Okay, so a little bit more on Allende, just because I think this guy's fascinating, and I want it's important to have a picture of who is. Oh, she went to therapy. That's great. No,
go to therapy.
Yeah.
They're obsessed. Go to therapy nowadays. Yeah.
Not only was he a psychoanalyst and thereby one of the very few options for Nin, she was drawn to him because he believed, and this is maybe true, he was very intensely believed that neurosis was a problem for the artist and that it has to be resolved in order for the artist to function in the world. Like, other than this idea of like the artist should be neurotic and should lean into the neurosis, his point was like, no, the neurosis is actually getting in your way. You have a tendency towards neurosis because you're an artist, but actually the neurosis ends up getting in your way. And so she thought that he might be able to help her because she was trying to write fiction. She was trying to get out of the diary and take up in the footsteps of D.H. Lawrence, essentially, right? So he didn't help her with any of these problems, really, right? After the third or fourth visit, Nin didn't want to expose herself anymore in her internal psychology, so she tries to seduce him. Shortly thereafter, she does seduce him. And takes control of the whole situation with him. Right,
total transference, by the way.
Oh, of course, yeah. He's a sort of vaguely a father figure, and because he's in control of the situation, and she takes control of it now.
Again, murdering every single rule of psychoanalysis.
Destroying it.
Because you can't. Not only can you not let your patient one up you sexually, but the way that they one up you sexually basically destroys the whole process of psychoanalysis to begin with. I mean, for those who don't know, I mean, it's you couldn't go any worse as a psychoanalyst than that. It even comes up in The Sopranos between Melfi and Tony, because Tony wants to fuck her the whole time. Yeah. She's like, no, I can't. And
Allende didn't. Yeah, okay.
And she just like a stalking butler. She, elevates. I'm quoting Tool, by the way. The whole "I will find a center in you, I will chew it up and leave."
Yeah. Patron band of the show. That's 2 episodes in a row. Tool gets a shout out.
That's right.
Yeah, very good.
Yeah. Now, 1931, December 5th, 1931, one of the, and there's many major events. This is a major event in her life. Robert Osborne, a lawyer friend of Hugo's who has literary ambitions, introduces Anaïs Nin to Henry Miller.
Oh, here we go.
On their first encounter, after the first encounter, Nin says, "He's a man who makes life drunk. He is like me." Hugo said to her, "You will fall in love with Henry's mind, and I am going to lose you to him." She said, no, you won't lose me. Turns out they were both right. So we're going to talk more about this, right? We have to talk about the Henry Miller episode. I always had Henry Miller. I read some Henry Miller I've read a fair amount of him. I read Black Spring, Tropic of Cancer, Air Conditioned Nightmare, and he's a talented guy and deserves to some extent his reputation. He is also. I made a couple things happen to me doing this research. I realized what Nin was all about and sort of how both felt bad for her and also kind of despised her. Got a very high respect for her writing when she's at the height of her powers, and also realized that I absolutely loathe Henry Miller as a human being.
Yeah.
Like, I would probably punch him in the face if he were like alive, middle-aged right now. He's despicable. All right. So we'll get into why. And it's not because he's like, it's not because he makes life drunk and he's a fun guy. It's not why. He's a terrible human person. Okay. Now, it's not long after they meet, Henry Miller and Nin, and Henry Miller is this poor writer. He hasn't had any success. He's not the Henry Miller that we know of now. Nobody knows who Henry Miller is. He's this American who's somehow in Paris for reasons that aren't even 100% clear. He doesn't have any money, has no source of income. He's married to a woman who's in the United States, but he's left a family before that to be with that woman, right? And now he's in France for some reason. He meets Nin, and shortly after their meeting, within a month or two, Nin is paying for Henry Miller to live out of the allowance she gets from Hugo. So now Hugo is paying for Nin, he's paying for Nin's mother and brothers, and he's paying, without knowing it, for Henry Miller's to live.
Total Findom.
Yeah.
Whoa.
Wow.
Yeah.
Whoa.
Yeah. And actually, and there's even a point where Nin goes back to Hugo and says, my allowance isn't really enough. And this is mostly because she's paying for Henry Miller to have a lifestyle. Now, early on, she says Henry Miller is the last person in the world that I would have sex with. Never going to do that. That's never going to happen. Of course, that's not true. That's one of those things that you sort of doom yourself to the opposite happening as soon as you say it. You know, it's like that'll never happen. That means you're basically planting it in the future, right? I want to talk a little bit about his marriage. So he's married to this woman, June Miller. She's a Hungarian American dancer. They referred to her as a taxi dancer, which isn't something that I'd ever heard of. Apparently, a taxi dancer is like a person you pay to give you a private dance. So probably this verges into stripping and vaguely maybe
into
a little bit
has
of light
that
sex
element
work.
to it.
Yeah. When they finally remake Taxi Driver, that'll be the sequel. That'll be the new taxi dancer. Yeah.
Can you imagine if they ruined Taxi Driver? Like
no.
Travis,
there are
Travis
some
Bickle
films.
Be trans.
You know? Oh, geez. There are some films that like if they ever touch it, like I have said, I will go on record. If they ever remake Jaws, I will be throwing Molotov cocktails into theaters. AMC's will be. Yeah, it's over. That is my MK Ultra trigger. If my handler's listening, just do that, and I'll be your guy for the news cycle. Don't worry, I'll be the main character if you ever.
If they
try
remake
to touch
Apocalypse
Jaws.
Now, it's all over. It'll be done. They'll remake Apocalypse Now, but it'll be like during Iraq, and we'll have some kind of like. I don't know. Maybe it'll be in Ukraine. There we go. It'll be, where Kurtz gets, Kurtz becomes a Vatnik, and then he like fights against the Ukraine. I'm sorry. What are we talking about? Sorry.
I have no idea. Right? Yeah.
Instead of Kurtz, Lee Strelkov would be like the one that has to. Never mind.
Okay.
No, sorry.
We'll put some storyboards together after the episode.
Yeah. Well, just somebody DM Amanda Milius and see if she'll be willing to read the screenplay. I'm sure.
It's funny. You know what's funny, Kevin? You mentioned that because I think it was me and who was it? It was it may have been me and my friend Goran on War Report podcast where we talked about like Amanda Milius like producing a story about Gibby and Motorola, but it'd be like the most pro Russian film in existence. It'll be like the Ukrainians are all a bunch of like Banderai Nazis and like Gibby and Motorola like the heroes, right? And they get assassinated by the State Department.
Oh man, yeah. Yeah, it reminds me of Stone Toss burgers.
Yeah.
Right, Russians.
Like what?
Oh, this is so inside baseball. All right, this is good. But Brad, everything you said about Anaïs Nin being this nerve center at the heart of the 20th century is. Totally true. Yeah. And I think the timing of this is outstanding too, because she runs parallel to Crowley.
She does.
She has her own arch, wild, erotic sexuality, forbidden craziness. So I think these episodes are kind of they're sibling polycule. They're related. So I appreciate the timing is very good.
But maybe Brad, if you could expand on the Henry Miller aspect of it. I mean, Henry Miller becomes a huge linchpin of your life, but why do you hate him so much? And is not Tropic of Cancer sort of like a semi-embellished autobiography of his own life? Like being poor, a poor, starving artist.
Yeah, the reasons that I hate him are there's a handful of them. One is he's a coward. He's just a total coward. And Nin even says this about him. Like, eventually when they do fall apart and their relationship kind of falls apart, her point is like, he is a small man. He never stands up for anything or for himself. He always just walks away from any kind of conflict or problem. He's terrified of everything. Like, he lives this like, drunken, I don't care about anything. But as soon as anything actually gets difficult, he's nowhere to be found.
I hate people like that. I've known people like this. Yeah.
He's taking this money from Nin. Okay, whatever. You got to get money, I guess. But like, he knows it's coming from this guy, Hugo, and he's stipping his wife. It's just, to me, like, how long can you do that for before you hate yourself? And he does it for years. Another thing is he's constantly taking writing directly from Nin, plagiarizing stuff that she wrote, putting it in his own work.
Oh my God.
And then negging her writing. Like parts of Tropic of Cancer, Nin wrote fundamentally.
Oh,
what?
Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. after he read her work on Lawrence, he said, "Oh yeah, I'm going to write a book on D.H. Lawrence. Yeah, I'm going to. I'll write one, and it'll be a big deal because I'm Henry Miller." And then he stole other things from her too. And part of it, like, when June shows up, his wife shows up in Paris. Her and Nin have a very weird relationship. There's a sort of a rivalry where they're competing for Henry, and June doesn't
your
know
wife
for
and your
sure.
side piece know each other.
Yeah, they're friends.
Yeah.
They hang out, and June doesn't know if they're sleeping together, but she kind of suspects they are. And Nin is obsessed with her, has like a crush on her, but like it never really gets sexually consummated because Nin isn't actually a lesbian. She has a few experiences, but when it comes,
of course.
She likes the seduction of it.
Of course.
Yeah, she likes the seduction of it, but when it comes to actually doing it, it doesn't actually interest her.
It's like most girls that say they're non-binary or bi nowadays. You know, they only have sex with men. They've only been vaguely curious into women. Yeah.
So
is Anaïs Nin, is she a vampire? Is this like a vampire woman?
A little bit.
I'm getting a bit of a vampire. I could be that I watched The Hunger the night before last.
I've heard this is good. The Hunger, is it good?
Yes. Highly recommend. David Bowie, very aesthetic, fun film to watch. Yeah, it's a vibe. Put it on in the background. Yeah.
So and then so the other reasons I don't like
witchy woman.
I don't like. I mean. Other than the stuff that he's doing, to me, is fundamentally immoral. It's the cowardliness, right? Like when June eventually finds out that, the other thing. So Nin is obsessed with June, and she writes about June in her diaries. When Henry reads it, he says, "That's the better description of June. You captured her better than I ever could. Can I use that in my own writing?"
What is cell phone, by the way, as like one of the greatest American writers of the 20th century? What is cell phone? My God.
Right. It's pathetic. Now, and then when June finally figures out that they are sleeping together, she's like, "We're going to get a divorce." And she goes to Henry and says, quote, "Now you've got the last chapter for your fucking book, don't you?" And Miller just dissolves into a puddle. He's just, oh no, I don't know. Like there's nothing to him. Like in the end, there's nothing to him. And that's the part I can't.
Pulls a Sylvia Plath right there.
Right.
See, I have a letter to Henry. This was written.
Yeah, go for it.
In I want to say, yes, this is 1942.
Okay, so they'd known each other for about 8 or 9 years at this point.
Yeah. This is like where things get sour, if I recall. So we're still writing at cross purposes this morning. You say, "Sadly, that I do not believe in your capacity to take a job, blah, blah, blah." But here's the spicy part. And for what? For me, how can you expect me to turn around and ask you to do what you have spent 12 years proving to me you can't do? I get my integrity from doing repulsive things for a human resource for you. You can't do these things for another human being. Also, I haven't asked you to do anything for me, but for yourself. I've only given you what you wanted again and as always. And so she puts this in italics. What you desperately tried to get from me. Again, I am letting you be yourself. Choose your life. You desperately tried to get from me. Again, I am letting you be yourself. Choose your life. You did everything to prove to me your deep resistance to life here. I can only envisage your return as tragic for me. I have to slowly make your conscience, thus rhythm between us, is broken because you asked too much. You set about to be true to yourself, to your wishes and dreams. And again, being true to your dreams is very important to her. This has been so superhuman a task, for I am now drained, weak, only ask for respite, peace. This is in italics. I feel broken. I cry in the streets and I can't climb stairs. I feel absolutely weak. Je ne peux plus. Today I said in the middle of the street in the passerby, "No puedo más." I want to shout it to the Spanish. I don't know why. No puedo más. No puedo más. I can't do anymore. Then carrying on. You made no effort to make it better. I know at times when you were doing the meaning of it, each whim, each rebellion was significant for me as a source of pain, but I couldn't stop you. I know you don't understand what has happened to me. I am being destroyed, but I know all my letters mean nothing to you. We now speak a different language. By sheer suffering, I have become merely a human being. All I want is tenderness and humanity. You have become something else. if it pleases you to think it's a Buddha, let it be Buddha. I'm meaning like I'm like a bodhisattva. I'm carrying, and she's being melodramatic. She's like, I'm like a bodhisattva. I'm carrying on the sufferings of the world, right? My real self was in the fantasy stories, in the house of incest and fairy tales. I can't write these anymore. My devotion to human beings have killed me. The mother has finally murdered by the dreamers. For me, the nonsense and the dreaming and the madness are all alike. They're the way of killing me because I have served them with my life. So this is why I think her, even though her literary output is small, I would say that her journals and diaries take on a literary character. So she is enacting the dreamlike state of being the mother to Henry Miller, but then Henry Miller impishly and childishly protests and says, no, I'm going to go my own way. But really, because he is a weak man, he cannot go his own way. Right. And so it's sort of like it's one of those things where it's like she's struggling with this recognition that he is a weak man. But she cultivated that relationship to begin with.
She did. I mean, I think that him being a weak man was appealing in a certain way, right? At first. And then when you realize what the implications are, that a weak man will just take everything from you over time, right? Will just suck you dry. And then the thing too that was important to her, because she wanted to be a writer. I mean, there was two things. She at one point would talk about how her greatest desire was to be a sort of a mother muse lover. That was what she wanted. She wanted to be a great, be sort of merged with a great, famous, rich artist for whom she would be the muse and the mother and the lover of. That was sort of her fantasy.
But again, that's the musing of those different things, to be a mother that is also, which in a way is I hate to say it, is very deep in the male fantasy. In a way to have, think of it, a mother you can fuck, right? Like someone who is a maternal nurturing figure, but also has that element of sexual release. This is something deep, and as painful as it is to admit, this is something deep within the male psyche.
It has an unconditional quality.
Though.
It has an unconditional quality to it, right? Your mother loves you no matter what you do. You don't have to like meet her standards or whatever. Right. So there's that part of it, right? It's all, and she kind of wanted to play that.
Not my mom. I'll tell you that. Rest in peace, Mom. That's a different podcast, isn't it?
Right. When we get to Freud,
you guys got to go on the clock. 150 an hour.
That's the after dark for the Freud episode.
Right.
But that's the thing. Like her constant role is like the Madonna whore. Like that's the thing. Like she's sacrificing herself. She's giving herself to Henry Miller. She's this source of nurturing and comfort and material existence. But at the same time, she also is a philanderer and she cheats. And it's like very Madonna whore right there. It's they embody both characteristics, because a lot of promiscuous women, I said this before, I said this in my mega variety podcast of Content Minded, where the solo one, where I'm like, a lot of promiscuous women, they do take on sort of like a maternal figure. And a lot of her erotica is about prostitutes. And there's this one about a madam who is like the mother of the prostitutes, right? She takes on this maternal role towards men. It's very like the Madonna horror just runs right through Anaïs Nin's output. And I think, are we getting close to House of Incest? Because
we're getting there. Yeah. One thing before, I want to talk one or two, because to me the greatest.
But Henry Miller is very important. Like, in fact, her most important relationship besides her father, of course,
is Henry Miller. Yeah. Now, one thing that's significant about it to me, and why the chief thing that I hate him for, is he ends up stealing stuff from literary work and ideas from her and presenting them as his own. This is the part of me that just wants to crush him like a bug.
Yeah.
Here's an example. This is later on. This is after they'd known each other some years. And Lawrence Durrell comes into their orbit as well, who wrote the Alexander Quartet, great writer in his own right. Henry Miller had written this thing called this film treatment or something called Scenario. And Larry told Henry, this is from the biography, Larry told Henry and Anaïs's presence that the best part of his scenario was quote, about the man oiling the mechanism in his chest, the astrologer scene. Anaïs glared, for it was copied word for word from pages Henry insisted she eliminate from her own work. He wrote the film, but the ideas were mine. all of them. He only added Henry-like touches of asses, doves coming out of its skeletons, noise, and things I didn't like. And so I will see my ideas made popular by Henry and signed by Henry, the greatest piece of spiritual robbery I have ever seen. Meanwhile, he's taking money from her husband, right, to survive. And it's just... I can't abide it. I can't abide it, Kevin.
Everybody is cucking everybody else in this dynamic. This is a very strange situation.
Yes.
I do not approve. And you're right. Yeah. I did not know that Miller was a terrible plagiarist.
I didn't either. It didn't occur to me. Yeah. Now he came up with some of it. I mean, he wrote some of it, but a lot of the stuff he's stealing from Nin. And to me, if you're stealing, anyway. It gets into like artistic ethics, right? Everybody's stealing a little bit, but to just like go to somebody and be like, you should take that out of your thing and then you use it, right? Like that's just, you're a criminal. That's an artistic crime to me. Anyway. Okay. So also in the early 1930s, kind of getting back to the biography, I'm all heated about Henry Miller now. I'm all pissed off. Let's see. 1933. Okay. 1933. Nin has been in psychoanalysis for a few years, so she's mentally as healthy as can possibly be. This is not true, obviously. Somewhere between Henry Miller banging the hell out of her, June Miller tantalizing her, Hugo's vacillating, ignorant, totally ignoring her, and having violent appetite for her, and Allende breaking down barriers in Nin's mind, her neurosis just goes through the roof, right? This is we've put enough pressure on Nin's psyche that things start to crack in there. I think we don't quite have a nervous breakdown, but we're starting to see it. There's things like Tropic of Cancer starts coming out here. It doesn't come out in the United States until the 60s because it's banned, because it's got obscenity or whatever. Hugo pays for it to be published the first time. So the first time Tropic of Cancer comes out, Nin's husband pays for it to be printed as a favor to Nin, right? She around this time she goes, she also starts to have a brief relationship with Antonin Artaud. Very disappointing rendezvous in the same hotel room where she had a tryst with Allende.
A friend of the pod, Antonin Artaud. Yeah. We did a very well-received Artaud episode.
We did.
Right. Yeah.
And I'm going to read a little.
Adam Lehrer.
I'm going to read a little bit from a short story. This is one of her better bits of fiction. It's called Under a Glass Bell. It doesn't come out till 1944. And we'll talk a little bit more about that process. But there's a story about her relationship with Artaud in here. And it's cool. I just want you to get a sense of what her fiction is like, because a lot of the stuff we've read is her diary or essays, and her fiction has often been called surrealism. It's sometimes taught as surrealism. And I think surrealism, I think different people have different definitions from a literary standpoint, what actually surrealism is. And depending on your definition, her fiction, particularly these stories in Under a Glass Bell, can certainly fit. This is from a story called Je suis le plus malade des surrealistes, and it's about Artaud. He was sitting in a deep chair in the corner of the room, his angular body struggling against the softness of the chair, looking for stones to match the leanness and hardness of his bones, the petrified tautness of his nerves. Sweat was pouring from his brow. He did not wipe it off. He was sitting taut, with his vision burning in the pupil of his eye, and the intensity of the man who committed suicide every moment, but unwilling to die alone and bringing all others down with him into his death. Unwilling to die alone and with his eyes murdering and condemning those who did not want to die, insulting those who smiled, moved away from death. There was a door at his right. He leaped away from my eyes and walked into the hothouse. I thought he was moved by his secret pain to vanish from us, and I did not expect him to return. When he reappeared, there was the scum of Veronal on his lips, and his gestures were slower. I am starting a theater of cruelty. And this is Artaud's words. I am against the objectivity of the theater. The drama should not take place on a stage separated from the audience, but right in the center of it, so near to them that they will feel it happening inside of themselves. The place will be round like an arena, the people sitting close to the actors. There will be no talking, gestures, cries, music. I want scenes like the ancient rituals, which will transport people with ecstasy and terror. I want to enact such violence and cruelty that people will feel the blood in them. I want them to be so affected that they will participate. They will cry out and shout and feel with me, all of us, the actors. And then he's not talking anymore. This explosion, this shattering of the being into ecstasy and terror was what Pierre wanted to accomplish with his theater of cruelty. And I wanted to follow him. With all the fervor of my eyes, I said to him, I would follow him into all his inventions and creations. Nobody would follow him. When he stood up and shouted about his theater, they laughed. They laughed because each cell of the dream that Pierre projected was enormous, swollen out of the blood and the sea in his blood, the water of his body, his sweat and tears, his passion for the absolute. No one else believed in the absolute. No one else dared to explode to reach ecstasy. No one followed him. They laughed. Right. And it goes on like that. But yeah, I don't know. It's powerful. And, you know, she's putting words in Artaud's mouth, but I think they're reasonably accurate towards his description of a theater of cruelty, but clearly in her own voice, I think. And you know, there's a number of we'll get to talk more about this book, but I wanted to hit that Artaud note just because we've covered him on the show. And again, Nin is constantly right against everything happening culturally, right? When this Artaud thing happens, she's also still sort of in a relationship with one of the first psychoanalysts in France, Artaud, right? Her husband, who is, you know, in touch with the financial centers of Europe. She's always right. She's always right in there. It's fascinating.
This furthers our thesis that at any given time, there are maybe only about 25,000 actual people and that everybody else is just an NPC. I don't
Didn't
care how that
sleep
sounds.
with Gore Vidal?
She tried to. She tried to. She wanted to. She claimed that Gore Vidal wanted to marry her, but later on he would say that was like, he was like, I don't know what she was talking about.
I just wanted to be friends. That's it.
Yeah.
Her affair with Artaud was not very satisfying. Was Artaud?
No, he was not. I don't know if exactly he was impotent or what the deal was when it came to her, but it wasn't sexually satisfying. She was fascinated with him as an artist, and I think she thought he might fill that role where she could be the muse mother lover thing, and it just sort of never coalesced into that.
I'm not surprised knowing what we do about Artaud.
Right. So let me give you a little bit from her. Let me see. Well, okay. So around this time, 1934. This is also where something happens that we're going to talk about in the After Dark. Her and her father comes back around into her life. He's been periodically trying to exert control and play games. When she was a teenager, Joaquin, her father, would say like, would write letters to Rosa saying he was going to divorce her for negligence. Like weird. He was always doing weird power moves. And this would be the big power move. And we're going to talk more about that in the After Dark. Now here's where we start getting into House of Incest, is in the mid-30s. Now I want to talk about one kind of other thing, because she's getting sort of sexually adventurous, and there's a time, I think it's in 1934. It's after the Great Depression, so the Nin Guler family is broke. Okay, so after the Great Depression, again, Hugo is involved in banking. If you're involved in banking in 1929, things aren't going super well for you unless you just made a couple lucky bets.
Walk in the middle of the street on your way home.
Unless
don't
you
walk
somehow,
on the sidewalk.
Unless you shorted everything somehow, like you're not in good shape, right? She also gets around this time, she's got involved with Otto Rank, her second psychoanalyst. For a while, we'll get to it, Otto Rank tells Nin that she should be a psychoanalyst. And because there are no standards or practices, she would become, for a while, a psychoanalyst. But we're going to talk more about that. I think it's hilarious that you would go to her for some kind of treatment, right? Okay, here, we're going to talk about House of Incest, but let me give this thing. She gets pregnant in 1934. She believes it's Henry Miller's child. She's pretty convinced. And the question is, okay, well, what does she do? She bring the child to term? Does she give birth and, risk that poor Hugo will know that it's Henry's child, right? Does she give up the child to, say, her mother to take care of, or put it into an orphanage? Or
you can guess what she does. Okay. So
now here's the thing. Okay, here's the other question. Does she get an abortion like we would think about getting an abortion? Not really. She goes and she gets scared. And so she doesn't want to go undergo the procedure. So the what she calls the sage femme, which is basically the abortionist, gives her what Nin calls potions. They're abortificants, right?
Yeah.
And she's taking these. And for some reason, the pregnancy kind of keeps happening. And they're a little perplexed as to why she's taking these things, but it doesn't immediately, it doesn't, it's supposed to, over some period of time, weeks or whatever, end the pregnancy. And it doesn't. So right after she goes, this is even hard to talk about. Yeah. Right after she starts taking the quote unquote potions, she goes, and for the first time, she, in this weird like thing she's doing in her head and living in the dream, she quote drinks Henry's sperm for the first time, which to her is a big significant moment. And then she goes to Otto Rank, her new psychoanalyst, and does the same with him, like immediately, back to back, right? So something weird is going on. She literally just started taking potions to kill this child in her, and then she's going to conduct sex acts that she's never done before for the first time. And then,
yeah,
in the 6th month, a little bit later, they give her an injection to induce labor because they're pretty sure that she's now had this now stillborn child. She manages to cajole for all this happening. She's going to give birth to a stillborn baby. She manages to cajole all of the men in her life, Henry, her husband, Otto Rank, and her cousin Eduardo, to all be there as though she's giving birth to all of the child of all of them.
Wow.
Right?
Wow.
And she says she's sort of laying there as she's giving birth to a child she knows is not alive. She says, all of this love coming back, calling me back to life, right?
If you had to pick a picture of what Jung calls the terrible consuming mother that destroys the Manny Longhouse mother that destroys her own child, her own children, like that's no greater right there. Yeah. And the fact that all the men in her life just consented to it, and it's the supreme act of love to destroy her offspring. That's just. It's satanic. What can I say? There you go.
It's awful. Now, around the same time, she's writing what is actually, I think, her breakthrough non-diary work, which is House of Incest. I'm going to read the first little bit of it, and then we can talk more about as much as we want about the book, because I want to pair it with what just happened. This is the beginning of House of Incest, the book that will come out shortly after all this. It was like yawning. I loved the ease and the blindness and the suave voyages on the water, bearing one through obstacles. The water was there to bear one like a giant bosom. There was always the water to rest on. And the water transmitted the lives and the loves, the words and the thoughts. Far beneath the level of storms, I slept. I moved within color and music as inside a sea diamond. There was no currents of thoughts, only the caress of flow and desire mingling, touching, traveling, withdrawing, wandering, the endless bottoms of peace. I do not remember being cold there, nor warm, no pain of cold and heat, the temperature of sleep, feverless and chillless. I do not remember being hungry, food seeped through invisible pores. I do not remember weeping. I felt only the caress of moving into the body of another, absorbed and lost within the flesh of another, lulled by the rhythm of water, the slow palpitation of the senses, the movement of silk. Loving without knowingness, moving without effort, in the soft current of water and desire, breathing in an ecstasy of dissolution. I woke at dawn, thrown upon a rock, the skeleton of a ship choked in its own sails. This is referred to as the birth passage of House of Incest.
Yeah.
And the fact that she went through this whole thing with her weird pregnancy, childbirth thing, and then she's like writing imagining herself being a fetus.
Yeah, because House of Incest at its root is about it's about female sensuality in a way that is self-contained, in a way that is the giving of oneself over to oneself, but it's also about relations to others in a very deep way, to where your own emotional state is reflected in the other and they are reflected in you, vice versa. And so there's always this sentiment that runs through. And of course, she's writing half of this on hash, by the way.
Oh, yes. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
So the colorful metaphors that you would find
given to her by her psychoanalyst.
Yeah,
Gosh,
of course. So the metaphors you'd find in sort of naturalist poets like Pablo Neruda, for instance, Spanish naturalist, like it's very much to the sea. It's very much to the exposure of female eroticism and sentimentality in a way that is poetic. In a way, like for example, one of my favorite passages was the Modern Christ one. But let me read you this because it has parallels, I think, with a certain passage in her erotic short story Matilda. So here she says, he has collected a box of paint from he never painted with, 1,000 books with pages uncut, and they were covered with dust. His Spanish cape hung in shoulders of a mannequin. His guitar lay with strings snapped like long disordered hair. He sat before a notebook of blank pages. I chewed and chewed until it was deteriorating. Every thought or impulse I have is chewed into nothingness. I want to capture all my thoughts at once, but then run in all directions. If I could do this, I would be capturing the nimblest of minds like a shawl of mininins. I would reveal innocence and duplicity, generosity and calculation, fear and cowardice and courage. I want to tell the whole truth, but I cannot tell the whole truth. His skin was transparent like that of a newborn child. His eyes were green like Moses, like moss. He bowed to Sabina, to Janine, to me, to meet the modern Christ, who was crucified by his own nerves for all the neurotic sins. The modern Christ was whipping the perspiration which dripped over his face as if he were sitting there in the agony of a secret torture. Pain-carved features, eyes open as if dilated by the scenes of horror, heavy-lidded with world-heavy fatigue. In our writing, skipping further, in our writings we are brothers, I say. The speed of our vertigos is the same. We arrive at the same place at the same moment, which is not so in other people's thoughts. The modern Christ said, I was born without skin. I dreamed once when I stood naked in a garden, and there was carefully and neatly peeled like a fruit, not an inch of skin left on my body. It was all gently pulled off, all of it. And then I was told to walk, to live, to run. I walked slowly at first, and with the garden was very soft, and I felt the softness of the garden so acutely, not on the surface of my body, not all through it. The soft, warm air and the perfumes penetrated me like noodles through every open, bleeding pores. All the pores open and breathing the softness, the warmth, the smells, the whole body invaded, penetrated, responding, every tiny cell and pore activated, and breathing, even trembling and enjoying it. I shrieked with pain. I ran as I ran in the wind, lashing me. So this is interesting because this exposure, this extreme disunity between the body, the self, and the other is there. And of course, the very end, the famous quote from House of Incest. Let me try to find it here. The one where it's about like I experienced myself through the other. Let me try to find it.
Yeah, it's important to note too, the title House of Incest. It's not about incest. It's people thought it was about like her relationship with her father, like the sexual relationship. It's not really. Like it's far more surreal, internal.
It's like a metaphor. The thing I keep thinking about is how, today it sounds very aspirational because she can afford a house.
That's true. That's true.
It's a bit classist and snobby now.
Yeah. So this is the quote.
The trailer home of incest or something.
No, but it's true. It gets a little bit there. So she says, if only we could all escape from this house of incest where we only love ourselves in the other. If only I could save you from yourselves, said the modern Christ. But none of us could bear to pass through the tunnel which led from house into world and to other sides of the walls, where there was leaves on the trees, where water ran besides pathways, where there was daylight and joy. We could not believe that the tunnel would open us to daylight. We feared to be trapped into darkness again. We feared to return once we came from darkness and night. The tunnel would narrow and taper. Down as we walked, it would close around us and close tighter and tighter around us and stifle us. It would grow heavy and narrow and suffocate us as we walked. So to me, it's very powerful how, say you have a group of people, imagine some kind of like indie film, for instance, if you had this, where a group of people are so intensely close together that they experience each other's emotions through one another. And the fear of going to the outside is so overpowering that this group of people does not cross over into an existence without one another. I think it's a very powerful metaphor. The incest is very much a sort of, I remember one literary critic described it as it's like the self is doubled, and you are in love. You're so intensely in love with this picture of the other self, which is you, that it's almost like an incestuous relationship towards yourself. That's the metaphor of House of Incest. It's very powerful. I think a lot of communities, a lot of like very cult-like groups and arrangements, even on the online world, are kind of like this. You could pretty much apply this passage to anything of that nature. And I think another thing too about House of Incest is that it's very, sorry, my cat is bothering. No, it's very interesting how when she's writing House of Incest, how she's reflecting on all these relationships with men in her life and so forth. But it's very much about the self-affirmation of it. But to relate it to the short story she did called Matilda, there's this one passage, again, brought on by hashish, right? Where Matilda is with these men on this boat. She's sort of like a traveling prostitute in some ways, but she's like a society woman. And she's talking about how they have this erotic experience where they're all high together, and it's almost like their bodies merge into one another. And then after a while, the one character starts envisioning this Picasso painting of different women of different ethnicities having different features that are cobbled together, kind of like the later Picasso. And it's sort of like the permeation of the self into the other in the space of literature is very fascinating here. Because now it's like yourself is rendered open into the other in these peak erotic experiences. You could read Bataille eroticism into a lot of works of Anaïs Nin. And to me, it's fascinating. I feel that, to me, Matilda is like probably the best of her erotic stories between Delta Venus and the little, what's it called? Little Bird?
Little Bird, I think. Yeah, I haven't read any of that. I read a lot of Delta Venus. And this is, and I'm glad we're reading these passages because we are kind of painting her pathologies, but like it does, and her weird self-indulgences, it does turn into powerful writing, right? It does. She does transmute this into very.
I was going to say that was a hell of a piece of writing.
It is. It really is. Yeah, and it's hard to deny. Like you can come into.
That's
like,
what's so frustrating. She's evil, but it's like she's a good writer.
Right. Right.
You also wrote about abortion too. This is from what's that? All these art hoes go on this website. What's it called?
I don't know.
What's it called? Thought Catalog or whatever. The margins. Okay. Yeah, that's like one of these sites. Like a thought burst or something. So this is what she wrote in her journal about abortion. The only wonderful moment, and of course they're framing this is powerful, this is self-affirming, this is women's rights, this is feminism, right? So the only wonderful moment in all of this was when I was lying on a little cot in the doctor's office. Another woman came in. The nurse pulled the curtain so I could not see her. She was made to undress and lie down to relax. Soon I heard a whisper, "How was it?" I reassured her, told her how I had not been able to bear it without ether, so it would be nothing with ether. She said, "How long were you pregnant?" 3 months. I was only 2 months. My husband is aware. He doesn't know. He must never know. Then she says, I couldn't explain to her that my husband knew, that my lover had to be deceived and made to believe I had no relations with you. Lying there whispering around about the pain, I had never felt such a strong kinship with women. Remember, you have to realize why it's kind of like a sacrament to the Democrat Party, right? Because it brings women together, right? So this is notorious Ruth Bader Ginsburg. The one I could not see or identify, the one that was also lying on a cot, filled with primitive fear and obscure sense of murder or guilt, of all the unfair struggle against nature, unequal struggle with all the man-made laws against us, endangering our lives, exposing us to inexperienced maneuvers, to being economically cheated and morally condemned. Women is truly the victim now but beyond the help of her courage and aliveness, how much there is to be said against the ban on abortion. What a tragedy this incident becomes for women. Although when she is hunted down, really, the doctor is ashamed deep down, but falsely so. Yeah, I'm sure the doctor that's making exorbitant profits when abortion was illegal, I'm sure they're heroes, right? They're heroes.
Right.
The doctor Yeah, I'm so grateful to you. So grateful that women moved in me so much. I wanted to know her. I wanted to pull the curtain and see her, but I realized she was all woman. So this woman that she can't see, who is also having an abortion, becomes a metaphor for all women, literally. The humility, the thoughtfulness, the fear, the childlike moment of utter defenselessness. A pregnant woman is already being in anguish. Each pregnancy is obscure conflict. The break is not simple. You are tearing away a fragment of flesh and blood. Adding to this deep conflict is the anguish, the question for the doctor, the fight against exploitation, the atmosphere of the underworld bootlegging. Abortion is made a humiliation and a crime. Why should it be? Motherhood is a vocation like any other. It should be freely chosen, not imposed upon. Not imposed upon women. So in one sense, she's saying it's this resoundingly emotional act of tearing away one's flesh and blood, one's being. But at the same time, she just reverts to typical, like, basic feminism of like, well, it's free to choose.
Yeah, so it's right.
She has to like put this purple prose into the heroic nature of a woman having an abortion.
Yeah. And this is that issue you're talking about. That was her second abortion, and that was
that was her second one.
Yeah, no, and that's fine. I just clarify biographically, that was a child that she believed to be Hugo's, not Henry's. And part of the reason she was having an abortion then was because she didn't want Henry to find out that she was sleeping with her husband.
Yeah.
Right.
And my God. Oh, her womb was like a graveyard.
Oh man. It's just so heavy and dark and difficult. And I don't know how I feel. I don't know that that's my job. I'm going to keep listening, Brad.
Yeah. So
listen and believe. Listen in. Lean in.
So let me get back on the biographical. So after the first sort of birth scene, right, and this next one you're talking about, there's this period in 1934. Where Hugo sends Nin off to New York, or agrees to, mostly because he wants to get her away from Henry. This is the thing. Hugo knows, but never states outright that Nin and Henry are sleeping together. They even for a while have an arrangement when Hugo's off on business, because he travels for business a lot. He's like an international banker. He's figuring out how to invest people's money and whatnot. There is a time where he will very explicitly tell Nin exactly when he's coming home, so that if she's in a situation with Henry, she can plan around it, right? And then when he comes home, he makes a lot of noise. It's one of these things where he's like, "Oh, well, I'm here at the front door," and then like noisily unlocking the door, and then like coming in and slowly going up the steps. So she has a chance for him to not find out that she's having the affair that he knows she's having, right? And this goes on for years. He just sort of just doesn't want to see it. He does this thing that I think is,
honey, I'm home to enable our codependency.
Yes. Now he does the thing where like he is so in love with her that he's blinded by it to the point where he's so in love with her that she must be pure. And so she would never do anything to hurt him. So he never allows it to enter like his prefrontal cortex that she's doing this, right? Because that would destroy so much of his image of her that like he literally can't cope with it. So he just constantly keeps it subconscious, but really knows that it's going on some level. Now, 1934, she goes to New York. She ends up being over there with Otto Rank, who's her second psychoanalyst, she's also sleeping with, right? And this guy's a big deal too. He wrote apparently the 2 chapters in Freud's interpretation of dreams. Like he's a heavy hitter for sure.
Well, he wrote Art and the Artist, and he wrote he wrote his other work about beyond psychology, which became very he's like, people call him Freud's hire, basically. Because Young, what happened with Freud and Young.
Right. Yeah. So
how dare you? You betrayed me.
Yeah.
You were the chosen one.
You had ideas of your own. Yeah.
How dare you?
Yeah. So she gets to New York. She basically sort of stays with Rank, but she also goes on this whole like sexual escapade adventure of her own. She starts up her own she starts taking patients as a psychoanalyst. And is actually quite popular. It's mostly upper middle class New York women that she's treating.
Can you imagine her poisoning the minds of these bourgeois upper middle class New York women?
Yeah.
I just couldn't imagine that.
Here's a very interesting note. One of her patients is what is her name? Laura Archera, who would later marry Aldous Huxley.
Whoa.
This is what I mean. It is this concentric, these ever tightening. It's like an ever tightening Venn diagram of characters on this pod, and
it's like Kanye exposing that trainer guy.
Right, a little bit. Yeah.
And then you're like, wait, he trained him and him and him and him and Mac Miller and
and
apparently,
and
speaking of that famous celebrity trainer guy that has some weirdo New World Order type of ties, also with a certain other ethnicity Kanye has been calling out lately. Did you know that Anaïs Nin Did you know Anaïs Nin knew Dr. Feelgood?
Yes.
Celebrities.
This is around this time.
Yeah, that gave him all amphetamines, basically.
Her nothing ever changes.
Her and Hugo,
nothing changes.
Her and Hugo were responsible for him coming to the United States in World War II. I don't know the exact details, but like they were instrumental in him coming to
and
America.
That domino led to basically doping up JFK.
Yeah.
So there you go.
Right? She's right there. Also in this time, this 1934 time, she has an affair with Norman Bell Geddes, who was designed the IBM Mark I computer case, right? So it's just weird how she's like this fluid that fills in the early 20th century.
She's like a pass around girl to the rich and famous.
There's a bit of that. Well, we're gonna get to her next year on season 3, artofdarkpod.com, Marilyn.
Oh yeah.
That's going to be a big episode. I cannot wait.
Speaking of celebrity pass around girls. Yeah,
exactly. Now she goes back to France in 1935.
Doorknob girls, everyone gets a turn.
That's right. When she goes back to France in 1935, this is where she gets the idea that she's going to have to print her own stuff. Like she's like starts to dream that this is going to happen, but it doesn't quite happen yet. There is this time, so I'm going to kind of blast through a couple things between 1935 and the sort of World War II era. Late 1937, she does eventually buy a printing press, and she will eventually start pressing. She also picks up this guy who becomes one of her, what she calls children. Henry Miller is another one of her, quote, children. These men that she basically takes care of both sexually and financially.
Oh my God.
With Hugo's money. And it's this guy named Gonzalo More, who's a half Scottish, half Peruvian Indian, a lazy communist, and a self-described printer who is married to a woman named Helba, who used to be a dancer but is now too ill to actually dance. So this becomes another one of her lovers for several years. And this is in the 1935, 1936 era. Now, World War II happens. Oh, okay. So partly what happens too in some of these travels, she pays Henry Miller to come along, but like on a separate boat so that nobody knows that they're going together, which is just weird.
Man.
And she will often, like, I think for a while she had Otto Rank and Henry Miller were both in New York at the same time, but Hugo had sent her to New York to get away from Henry Miller, to get her away from Henry Miller, right? So she just takes Henry's money and gives it to Henry, or takes Hugo's money, gives it to Henry, and he comes along anyway, right? Anyway, I want to read before we get into the World War II era, because this is where things really change creatively and in her career. I want to read the last letter from Henry to Nin. We read that great letter from Nin to him. Let's look at 273. This is, again, I'm pulling this from the Bear biography, but this is a letter from Henry Miller. January 15th, 1943. And this is one of the last times they talk for a while. He kind of comes back into her life, but later on. But he says to her, "The one obvious thing which you refuse to admit to yourself is, first, your lack of faith in yourself. Second, your lack of faith in others. Finally, I come out here to stand on my own legs, and though I drew on you less, it is at this point you crack up. At this point you cry out, too much, too much. I've given up everything." Right? So he's been sucking her dry for more than a decade at this point, and she starts to push back.
What a prolific himbo behavior right there. Like, my God.
Right.
Have some dignity.
Like, exactly.
Your Dommy sugar mommy.
No, man. You just like, sleep on the couch. Whatever it takes.
No, and this is the thing. In 1943, he was making enough money to support himself by writing
yeah,
at
that's
this
right.
point.
Because he wrote Tropic of Cancer around this time, didn't he?
Right.
Yeah,
and it was selling good, well in Europe, and he's gaining a reputation. And so he could support himself, but he kept taking the allowance anyway. There was a while when he was becoming a literary name that he asked her for more money. He said, now that I have a literary reputation, I have to go to these parties and things, and I need more money. And it's like, are you kidding? More money to support the literary superstardom that you got from stealing my work, and now you want money from me too? You know what I mean? Just like, this is why I hate him. This is why I want to punch him. This is why I want to crush him like a
shameless, beautiful.
Yeah,
but they deserve each other in a way when you really think about it. Like,
it's true. It's true. Okay, now 1940, that abortion happens that you talked about. And around the same time is when Nin and Henry get hooked up with this collector named Barnett Reuter, a New York rare book dealer. They'd moved to New York basically because World War II is kicking off, right? So they'd gotten out of Europe and ended up in New York. They get hooked up with this rare book dealer who supposedly, in the name of a certain collector who wanted to remain anonymous, they start paying Nin and Henry Miller to write erotica, like by the page erotica for a personal private collection. It was probably actually Reuter. It was probably actually going for Reuter was probably keeping it. But he would so the erotica that got published later under Nin's name was mostly stuff that she had originally written for this under this commission, apparently. And it was interesting because every time at least at first when she would send a story, the feedback would come back like less poetry, more sex. Like the collector just wanted like mechanical descriptions of people having sex, and she would have these like elaborate, like surrealistic, like adventure, like what you were talking about with the Hungarian adventure. And like this collector's like, I just want to read about people fucking and sucking. Like, what is going on?
There's nothing there. Like, it's let me actually try to find the passage. Here we go. Martinez, a Peruvian aristocrat, initiated her to opium. He bought his friends there to smoke. At times, they spent 2 or 3 days there, away from their families. The curtains would keep closed. The atmosphere was dark, slumberous. They shared Matilda among them. Wow, shocker. Right. But it does describe, I think, a beautiful description of the sort of limited experience of eroticism. So I can't bash it too hard, even though it's not, to me, it's not Scrimblow. It's not my cup of tea. The opium made that. Well, although if I had never mind. But multiple guys, like, come on. Anyways, the opium made them more voluptuous than sensual. They could spend hours caressing her legs. One of them would take one of her breasts. Another would sink his kisses into the soft flesh of her neck, pressing her with the lips only, because the opium heightened every sensation. A kiss could throw shivers throughout her body. Matilda would lie naked on the floor. All the movements were slow. The 3 or 4 young men lay back among the pillows. Lazily, one finger would seek her sex, enter it, lie there between the lips of the vulva, not moving. Another hand would seek it out too, content itself with the circles around the sex, seek another orifice. One man would offer his penis in her mouth. She would suckle it very slowly, every touch magnified by the drug. Then 4 hours they might lie still, dreaming. Erotic images would form again. Martinez saw the body of a woman, distended, headless, a woman with the breasts of a Belinese woman, the belly of an African woman, the high buttocks of a, I can't say gamerwood woman, an N-word ass. All this confounded itself into an image of a mobile flesh, a flesh that seemed to be made of elastic. The taut breast would swell towards his mouth, and his hand would extend towards them, and then after a part of the body would stretch, become permanent, hung over his own body. The legs would put into an inhuman, impossible way, as if they were severed from the woman, to leave the sex exposed, open. So imagine like stretching so far that, if one had taken a tulip in the hand and opened it completely by force, this sex was also mobile, moving like rubber as if invisible. Hands stretched it, curious hands that wanted to dismember the body to get to the interior of it. Then the ass would be turned fully towards him and begin to lose its shape as if to draw as if drawn apart. Every movement tended to open the body completely until it would tear. Martinez was taken with a fury because other hands were handling this body. He would half sit up and seek Matilda's breast, and if he found a hand on it or a mouth suckling it, he would seek her belly as if they were still the image that haunted his opium dream, and then fall lower upon the body so that they could kiss her between parted legs. Well, I wonder what that's a metaphor for. Matilda's pleasure in caressing the men was so immense that their hand passed over her body and followed her so completely, continuously, that she rarely had an orgasm. She would only become aware of the fact after the men had left. She awakened from her opium dreams with her body still restless. And then, of course, this is, you could say that there's a Shibaic sort of images with all the hands coming together in creation. But it's in this opium dream, it very much describes this sort of permeability of sexuality in a very poetic manner.
Yeah, absolutely.
And in this opium dream, it's like again, Bataille talks about this as well. Well, he has a lot of fucked up erotic short stories as well, such as the Mother one. But but it is that really struck me because it does have a lot of philosophic themes with the erotic experience itself transgressing the limitation between one's body and the other in the self.
It's powerful. It's striking.
And for sure. Mark this episode as explicit.
Yes. I think you might make sure you do that. Well, it was going to be. I mean, if you write it, talk about.
Oh, by the way, the ending of Matilda is about her meeting a Indian serial killer that is before the cops come in this like opium den. Is about to slit his knife into her, you know what? So there you go. Yeah. It turns into a Whitechapel album. So
powerful.
It's
crazy. Crazy.
Yeah.
Okay. So she's writing that. So think about for the next few years of this biography we're talking, think that she's writing that stuff. Sort of first thing, that's her personal stream of income is writing this stuff. And the collector doesn't really like it, but keeps paying for it, right? Very weird. During the war years, they're in the United States. Hugo actually starts to kind of get back and he starts to reignite his artistic side, and he starts doing engravings. Some of these engravings show up in Nin's books of Cities of the Interior books, and he would have his own shows. Like he actually did pretty well. He was covered by Vanity Fair at some point in the 1940s. And it's interesting because Nin had always like when he like sort of lost his creative side or didn't spend any time on it when he was, really, really working to be a banker, the best banker he could be, and make a lot of money. She despised that he was no longer a poet. And then when he takes up this engraving and starts to become moderately successful, or at least the beginnings of being successful, she also despises that. Because she's had no real success yet, right? So she always does this. She wants things both ways. She wants him to be this rich, successful artist, but not if he's going to be more rich and successful than her, right?
And he is a very talented surrealist engraver as well.
He is. Like, the engravings are great. A lot of them are great. Yeah.
Like especially like the ones that I found in the book. There was the dark print ones, which I believe they may have been mezzotint, if I recall. But But the engravings, the actual engravings are done very well. Very expressive as well. Very common to like the sort of engravings of a Picasso, like modernist engravings. So
right. So now 1942. Now one thing that comes out of these engravings, he makes his first gallery show. He makes like $200, which that's in the 1942. I don't know, modern dollars. That's like. It's at least $2,000. It might be more like $4,000. And he gives this money to Nin to buy a printing press, right? She buys a printing press. She buys every tray of Bernard Gothic light type she can find. And she's set out with Gonzalo, her lover, who was a lazy printer in his own right, and her cousin, her gay cousin, that she has a flirtatious relationship with. They're going to print copies of The Winter of Artifice. Winter of Artifice was a book that she'd had published in small run in France, but with the war going on, it's sort of lost. That printing's sort of lost to history. And now, while that's happening, so she's working on printing Winter of Artifice. I want to make another note about somebody else she knew. She got help from someone to start typing her diaries. Somebody typed up 60 volumes of them, and that somebody was Virginia Admiral. Does anybody know who Virginia Admiral is? Robert De Niro's mother.
Whoa.
Whoa. Taxi Dancer.
Yeah. Now here's another connection that's great. Robert De Niro, his father is Robert De Niro Sr., who is a painter of some renown in his own time, right? Now, Robert De Niro, there's a poet named Robert Duncan, who is a friend of Nin's. And I think Nin might have introduced him to Robert De Niro. Robert Duncan showed up in a previous episode we did on PKD, because later on, Philip K. Dick and Robert Duncan would be roommates, right?
Whoa.
Nin, I'm pretty sure this part is true. Nin introduced Robert Duncan to Robert De Niro Sr. That the introducing might not be right, but everything else is right. Robert Duncan seduces Robert De Niro Sr. and breaks up their marriage shortly after the birth of Robert De Niro Jr., the actor. Right.
Whoa.
So you've got this Nin is the psychoanalyst of Aldous Huxley's wife. She's she's instrumental in breaking up the marriage of Robert De Niro's parents. She's best buddies with a man who would later be the roommate of Philip K. Dick. Like it almost doesn't even make sense.
Yeah.
How many connections there are, right? Yeah. And she's at this point, she's not a very well-known writer. She's had a little bit of attention, but she's not the Anaïs Nin that we know, right?
She's in the scene,
getting away with it.
Right.
She's in the scene. She's not like known by the public.
Right. Now, let's see. First, I got so excited about that I lost my place. Oh, she she gets this insult. One of her lovers insults her, and I want to read it because I think it's kind of great. In the meantime, she yielded a moment of desire. She, quote, yielded to a moment of desire for this guy, George Barker, whom she compared to the hapless Waldo Frank, her least satisfying lover to date. Barker, quote, made love like a cataleptic, propelled by acrobatic excesses, jerks, and spasms without orgasm. Worst, he talked throughout, and what he said stunned her. You, Anaïs, will always be erotica. No matter how you present yourself as printer, writer, analyst, it's useless. You are an erotic symbol, and people will always treat you as such. They will always seek to enjoy you, never to help you. You, a psychoanalyst, I don't believe you know a word about it. You're going to practice witchcraft.
Whoa! Totally 100% right. Bass.
Metal. That's so metal. Power chords up and down. That's so heavy.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Intense. Now, 1944, Winter of Artifice, she prints. It does okay. 1944, she prints her own short stories, Under a Glass Bell. This book that I referred to, I read the Artaud, a bit about Artaud, and comes out. And she sort of brings it to one of Hugo's gallery showings, and it surprisingly is kind of a hit. She did, I think, a print run of like 300, and people really like it. And in fact, it finds its way into the hands of Edmund Wilson of the New Yorker, who at that time is like the #1 literary critic in the United States. He's like the most referenced literary critic of that time, and he likes it. So now her career has like, in a cool way, like she printed the book herself, like physically printed the book herself on a printing press, set the type, and like put all the, stitched it all together. She did it all herself. It's super DIY because she's being rejected left and right by everybody, always up till now, pretty much, 9 times out of 10, she tries to get something published, it's rejected, and she does her own thing, and it ends up in the hands of Edmund Wilson, which, as a self-published writer myself, I'm like, that's a little bit aspirational to me. Like, I think that's awesome. And Under a Glass Bell is good. Like, it's legitimately good. I had not read it before. I enjoyed reading it. It's not all hits, but like a lot of it is hits. It's more hits than misses by far. And it's very strange. It's very evocative. There's great imagery in it, which is, it's strange. I read Ladders to Fire first, which is the first novel in the tetralogy that comes out later. And Ladders to Fire is interesting because it's almost disembodied. It's almost all conversation and interiors. Like you you don't get images of where you are in space or descriptions of objects or anything. It's all internal and in dialogue. And then this book has these like lush descriptions of houseboats and street scenes, and this story called Ragtime, which is like 3 or 4 pages about that, like anthropomorphizes the city and the rag picker going through the city and picking through the junk of the city and rejecting anything that's whole and only taking that which is broken and can be reconstituted. Like, it's really good. I was super impressed by it. Like, if people haven't read Nin, it's a short, it's kind of a good place to start. You don't have to, it's not particularly erotic in any way. Like, if that's not your thing, if that's not what you're looking for, this would be, I think, a good place, a good bit to read. So now 1944, this book coming out, Edmund Wilson liking it, who she later tries to sleep with, but doesn't work out. She tries to sleep with everybody, basically.
Whoa.
Yeah. Whoa. Surprise.
Shocking.
There's this whole period too that we could have talked about. We're not going to. 1944. She has this whole period where she's picking up these Haitian men on a diplomatic mission, and sort of just like there's a whole bunch of relationships we're skipping over, let's say. Now, something does happen after this Under a Glass Bell thing, because despite the fact that there's not money coming in for her writing, she is now, I mean, it's a big deal for a New Yorker critic to hail you, right? At that time, for a New Yorker critic to write an article that says you're legit. And this is the other thing. Nin could not handle criticism, like, unless it was 100% positive. She did not want to hear any, like, if you said 9 good things and 1 bad thing,
the one bad thing would be,
she had no time for you. She did not want to hear it. And so this Edmund Wilson thing was pretty much unequivocally good. And so that set her off. That did more for her than all of the psychoanalysis analysis that she had gone under for the last like 20 years or whatever, right? It actually made a difference. And you see her sort of entering what I called her quote unquote mature Nin. Now, when I say mature, one way that I think we know she was mature now is this is around the time where she basically told Henry Miller to go pound sand. Like, it's over. I'm not supporting you anymore. We're done. I don't need any men like you in my life.
And Henry Miller's posting the soy jack. It's over.
Right. It's over.
Yeah, you know.
Right.
The chud jack. Yeah.
Now, how else we know is around this time she starts to prey on young men. It's 1944. She's like 40 years old, or 1945 this really kicks off. Did
you just say she starts to prey on young men?
Yeah.
Okay.
I've known promiscuous older childless women like this. It's a very common.
Yeah.
There's, like I said in my podcast one time, like, there's almost a sadness there in a way. Like, there's a sadness. There's sort of an attempt to reconcile what they've lost. They sort of take on the characteristics of younger women. Anaïs Nin is also in film and theater. Film and photography, which I have a passage about, but we'll get to that. So,
she's in Maya Deren films and in films that Hugo makes. I'll just give you this one anecdote, but it's not the only one about her and younger men. She's 42 years old. She meets this 18-year-old student from Yale, and basically tries to convince. She runs into a number of boys like this until she meets Gore Vidal. She meets Gore Vidal when he's 20 years old, right? And she's in her 40s. And they would become actual longtime friends, and he would be like a supporter, and he would be part of her quote, what she called her underground. And we're going to get to what the underground was. But he had he's a gay man. He's like a completely gay man, right?
Yeah.
No interest in women. Never really did, you know.
No wonder he hated Norman Mailer,
right?
You know?
Right.
Right. Did you see that? That was on. Was it? What show was that? Tonight Show, where they had at each other.
I have seen that. Yes,
that was amazing. The way they just shredded each other. Like, it was incredible. But, then of course, Gore Vidal famously having his frenemy status with William F. Buckley.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know,
it's a classic.
You call me a fascist again, I'll knock your goddamn head back.
Yeah. No, he's an interesting figure, and he's another guy who's in a lot of places. He's another little kind of guy, like a Forrest Gump kind of thing going in the 20th century, where he just sort of shows up. And you're like, oh, Gore Vidal is in this scene somehow. Around this time too, she starts writing the first books in the Cities of the Interior, which is these 5 kind of interconnected novels that would come out, one after another. Let's see. Oh, she also, we talked a little bit about Dr. Feelgood. It's important to remember that during this period in the 40s, she is high as a kite on Dr. Feelgood's special and probably mostly amphetamine cocktails.
Yeah.
Right. So, it's like, why am I so productive and full of life? That's because you're addicted to speed. I mean, so, take it one day off and see how you feel. And then, but this gets us right up to the next important moment, next fate. This is like the next big chapter of her life, 1947. I'm going to read a little bit of passage about her reading Rupert Pole, this guy named Rupert Pole. All right. And this is like maybe the most important relationship in her life. Let's see. He was 28. Okay, that's important to know, in 1947, and she would have been 44. Unemployed and newly divorced from an aspiring actress. He was stunningly handsome with the finely chiseled facial features and slim, muscular body found more frequently on Greek statuary than human beings. He was also painfully shy and socially insecure. Awkward and ill at ease at this party, he spent most of it sitting on a small sofa talking to Anaïs. When he learned that she had never been west of northern New Jersey, he described the landscape and sky of Colorado, New Mexico, and California. She discovered that he was full of aphorisms, mysticism, pacifism, Krishnamurti. Rupert believed daily life in New York was imbalanced, and as he was earthy and wanted to return to the West and a, quote, better balance between body and spirit. Danger, she told the diary that night. He is probably homosexual. Now, let's talk about Rupert Pole a little bit more, because Rupert Pole, again, we see how Nin's connected to everything. Rupert Pole is the step grandson of Frank Lloyd Wright.
Whoa.
And yeah. So anyway, just how connected she is to everything. Not long after they meet, Nin basically runs away to California with him. She's still married to Hugo, but this initiates years, basically almost right up to the end of her life in 1977, what she would call the trapeze, where she lived both in California and New York, lived in California with Rupert Pole and lived in New York with Hugo. And they both, quote unquote, didn't know about the other one. Right now, how much they knew and when they knew
bullshit.
It is hard.
I call bullshit.
Oh.
Yeah,
no way.
Yeah.
Maybe she was like the Ghislaine of her day.
Right.
Maybe.
Could be.
I don't know. No, that's not.
Yeah.
That's a little extreme.
That's very extreme.
Yeah, but there is
a younger
man,
you never
weird,
know.
Yeah, true. You never. Yeah, I mean, and she does seem to always be on the scene here. Yeah,
yes.
very, very.
Yeah, kind of like Ghislaine. Yeah,
just like old Jizzy. Good old Jizzy.
You look pretty good in that bikini photo, but never mind.
Well, she is my most problematic wood.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah.
Now here's, I'm gonna give you a little bit about she's Nin is a different psychoanalyst at this point, somebody named Dr. Staff. Anyway, there'll be one more. Staff asked if Rupert was a good lover. This is what frightened Nin the most, she admitted, for she thought of him the most potent lover she had ever had. It was the very quality in man that she had learned to fear and mistrust because of her father and Henry, both of whom evinced faithlessness she felt was due to extremes of potency, right? They're so potent that of course they're going to cheat. It was what had caused her over the years to turn to less and less potent men and finally to homosexuals. Dr. Staff asked if perhaps Rupert's healthy sexuality represented a return to a kind of a normality she had always lacked. In essence, a return to life. Yes, she agreed. Life again. Life. Right? So she is, despite her like still doing insane things. She does seem like she's got a little bit, she's in her mid 40s. She kind of sort of understands her motivations now to some degree, I think. And yet she's referred to as in her Wikipedia page as a bigamist. And she does get pregnant with Rupert's child, right? This leads to abortion number 3.
Okay.
This abortion is paid for by Gore Vidal and kept secret by.
Of course, because Gore Vidal, being the uber leftoid of his day, it's just, there you go. That's a symbolic act for him.
Yeah. Well, because he's never going to be involved in one, right? Because he's so
yeah. So it's sort of like Lena Dunham saying, by the way, there is a Guardian article, Guardian. I'm not going to make that stupid joke. The Guardian. There's this Guardian article where they said before Lena Dunham there is Anaïs Nin. That's the title. That's
really interesting.
Yeah. So you know how like Lena Dunham said that because she had a hysterectomy by choice, right? She's like I never had an abortion. I can't get pregnant, but I wish I did. So it's sort of like that. Yeah.
I wish I did. Yeah, it's strange to say.
Yeah, it's sort of like Gore Vidal being a gay man and paying for an abortion.
Oh my God.
You think this was modern? You think all of this is just the last 20 years? No,
this is 1940s.
This culture war shit's been going on for a while.
Right. That was a big point of the Crowley episode. I think it's only because of the wars, World War I and World War II.
Pretty much,
and
stymied everything because all that stuff kind of freezes
farther away, but it's really just a continuation. And then, of course, the boomers making their adolescence and their young adulthood seem like this total refounding. But of course it wasn't. It was just a continuation.
Mm-hmm. Well, even like with Anaïs Nin, what was I going to say? Like with like being an older woman, like that is also nowadays a current culture war thing about the sexuality of a woman. How dare like a man go with a younger woman? And it's like the tragedy of, and this is such a cliched point that's been, you could go anywhere, right? Go to like Lotus Eater's video, like go anywhere. But it is a true point in that, the tragedy of the modern like post-sexual evolution after the orgy society is that women demand that men destroy their own sense of a much older form of masculinity, but women in turn do not like this. Same with Anaïs Nin. She loves gay men or borderline gay men or very demure type of men who aren't the ideal masculine figure. They're more of like the literary, effeminate in a way, always wanting mommy. But the only time she like really gets her rocks off, like she really like achieves like peak nirvanic orgasm, is with manly men. So that's the tragedy of it, right?
Yeah, right. So Rupert Pole is initially the draw, and the reason she's willing to climb into the trapeze, which means a decade of lies and forgery and embezzling stuff from her. The only reason she does it is because the sex is so good that she cannot pull herself away from it. Right.
Dick got her acting strange.
Yeah, seriously. Like she has moments where she's like, I know what I'm doing to Hugo, but I can't not do this. Like I have to do this, right? And it's literally just about the sex, at least at first.
But then if you analyze her whole life, you can start to see how, and I hate to say it, a lot of promiscuous women who have histories of being abused, you could start to see that she can't really emote besides her body. Her body becomes the site of all emotion, especially towards men.
Right.
She can't give anything besides her body.
Yeah.
So
So she's living this thing. She's doing this thing. She's 6 basically, it varies a little bit, but it's 6 weeks in New York, 6 weeks in California. For each one of them, she has an elaborate set of lies about what's going on in the other place, right? So when she's in New York, she'll tell Hugo she's got to go out to California, where she's living in this sort of cabin in the woods where there's no telephone, but so she can focus on getting the diaries ready to publish.
I have to return some videotapes.
Right. Yeah. She tells Rupert in California that when she's in New York, she's just kind of staying with friends, and that she has a job working for this magazine that she has to be there to do editorial work for, right? And that she's working on, Rupert knows she used to be married to Hugo, or he thinks that there's a pending divorce, but that it's like over, and it's really not.
Oh, cool. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And
Typical.
yeah. So
don't worry, trust me, it's over.
Right.
Don't
It's
worry
over.
about
It's totally over. And this goes on. So they meet in 1947. It's until 1955 where Rupert is like, listen, we're getting married right now. We're going to get married right now. And she's like run out of excuses, right? Because she kept saying like, well, we got married in Mexico. Like she always has like some different weird lie that why
it
she
wasn't a
can't get
legal
divorced.
marriage.
My citizenship is all screwed up, so I can't because my, whatever. And eventually he like calls her on it and they get married. And so she is technically, quote unquote, legally married to two men simultaneously for years, which causes it. Anyway, we'll kind of talk about that a little bit. Now, I want to tell you what her life was like in California because it's funny. For a while, Rupert, who's a younger man, he's working for the Forest Service in like government housing, like a little shack where she has to like chop wood and scrub floors all day.
Oh,
right? Like, can you imagine? There's nothing worse for her. Like, there's no way she wants to do
he
it.
like took the most promiscuous woman in the world
and shut
like
it
glorifies.
down.
Yeah, and shut
basically
it down.
as close as you can to shutting her down, right?
Oh man.
Yeah. Now she had this thing. So this gets complicated, right? Yeah, I mean, she's got two husbands in different sides of the country, right? And she's constantly got to make up lies about why she has to go back. Her only source of income is Hugo, right? So she's taking money from Hugo, and she explains that is income she's making from her various editorial jobs, writing jobs, and a screening of Hugo's films because he's gotten into experimental filmmaking, which she did do. She would show some of his films. And she's then giving this money to Rupert, but it's just Hugo's allowance for her that she's giving to Rupert so that Rupert can then buy this house, right?
Yeah.
Now she would enlist a bunch of friends to help her with these lies, right? Because you can't do this. You can't lie to this magnitude by yourself, right? You have to have people who are, people who can take a phone call for you, people who can relay a message, people who can lie in your stead. Oh, she just stepped out, that sort of thing. She kept a complicated assemblage of information in a little box that she called her box of lies. That was all of the, this person, I told this person this on this date. This person can be relied upon to answer the phone when they call between this time and this time. And, it was so she could keep herself straight. And when she would fly in between between California and New York, she'd have to review this so that she could tell a cohesive story to the man when she showed up.
Like all those TikTok videos of these type of women that cold healing posts on Twitter, nothing compares to Anaïs Nin.
Yeah.
Like she's got a PhD in being a lying woman. Like it's
and I can't convey this. It seemed like this went on for a year. This went on from 1947 until when did it fall apart? It's kind of hard to say, but it went on for like 15 years.
Oh my God. I'm just picturing like that clip from the Trump speech from the snake where he's like, shut up, silly woman. I can just picture that in my head right now.
Did she not feel anything like remorse or
she did, but she kept feeling she did this thing where like, oh, it would hurt Hugo too much to find out. And it would hurt Rupert too much for him to
didn't
find
you know?
out. Yeah, Hugo knew. Rupert was a little... Well, see, when Rupert met her, she was this sophisticated writer. So, like, for her to say, hey, listen, I got all these opportunities in New York and I want to be with you, but I ain't got, I'm a writer. I'm like a modern woman who's got... That's a little more believable, right?
Yeah.
Whereas on the other end, Hugo knows her. Why are you're going to California to write in the woods? Like that doesn't make any sense. And then where is the writing? Why isn't there a book out? Like if you're in the woods writing all the time, what's happening, right? So it is like they kind of know, but they sort of don't let themselves know, especially Hugo. I feel bad for Hugo, but there is a certain line where it's like you gotta just accept, like, look at things square and
just get out of there, bro. Have some dignity.
Right, exactly. You
100%.
do some stuff.
I mean, is he stepping out on his side? And
he does a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. He definitely.
Well,
he
you
definitely
would have
does.
to, but my goodness.
Yeah. There is even a time where they go, and we're kind of glossing over stuff, and we're getting near the end. All we got to talk about is she does become famous in her lifetime. I do want to talk about that. There is a time where, like, she goes to France on vacation with Hugo and brings Rupert along and tells Rupert that she's there on assignment for a magazine and brings Rupert along. Hugo's staying in one place and Rupert's staying in another place, and she's like making up lies to run between them in France. Right? Just total insanity. Now, she hasn't totally stopped writing. She's still writing, but basically, even after the success of Under a Glass Bell, nobody will really publish her work. She gets a bump up by this small company called Swallow Press, which is based out of Denver. It's this guy named Alan Swallow who's just printing stuff out of his garage. It's like an uber indie, but it's actually kind of profitable. And he has pretty good taste. So he's putting out interesting things, including Nin. I did think this was funny. This is Nin about, I'm going to read this, and I think you guys will get a kick out of this. This is Nin talking about, she keeps getting rejected, right, for her Cities of the Interior books. And where is it? 367. This is again from the Bear biography, but this is Nin's voice. Okay. Meanwhile, she continued, and she's frustrated because she's not getting published. The homosexuals are ruling the arts and mechanics of writing.
She called them out.
What she condemned was
she named them.
Yeah, she named them.
Oh no!
In the art world, who's ruling it?
She's gonna be. Oh no!
Totally canceled.
What she condemned was the essential basic problem of homosexuality as a symptom of adolescence, of retarded maturity. The true degenerates are not the homosexuals for being homosexual, but those who, by a process of stunted growth, continue to exhibit at 50 all the symptoms of awkward, aggressive, dissonant, unstable adolescence. Okay.
Like all the men she's fucking.
It's just everybody in the group chat.
Everybody in the group chat. She's subtweeting right now.
For this, she blamed the larger American culture with its, quote, fixation on adolescence rather than the homosexuals themselves.
It's true. It's true.
But she's a product of it. But she's a product of it.
Right. Oh man! Wow, we get Gio.
Here's the last bit from her on this.
I'm going Alex Jones mode.
Yeah. Why should, and this is her voice, why should they make an effort to mature when all around them maturity is confused with aging, and the American literature, press, psychology, whatever, is a glorification of 17-year-olds, period, and a ridicule, a burlesque, a primitive caricature of middle age as a physical decadence without a moment's recognition of the contribution of maturity to civilization. The cult of the child produced the type which pervades American letters, arrogant, narcissistic, intent on destroying the parent, as all adolescents are.
Wow.
I take back everything I said about her.
One of us. One of us.
You'd be a base right-wing e-girl. She'd start posting spinny wheels and everything.
Wow.
No, but that's true though. But unfortunately, she's the same product of that stunt.
It's about her too, and she doesn't quite see that. But But
American culture, I hate to say it, North American culture, because American culture is now global world culture, globalization's Americanization. It is true, like the worship of the cult of the adolescent, because the adolescent is like, you're like, quote unquote, mature enough to enjoy things like, sex, drugs, blah, blah, blah. But you still don't have any responsibility. That is like the nirvanic period of all literature and culture and pop, the culture industry, in other words.
They're the perfect. They're the perfect consumers. Every teenager is a blank slate for Madison Avenue, whatever you want to call that, whatever that thing is, so they can mold them. And so by the time you're 40, it's over, bro. Right?
By the time you're 30,
you got to get that. So. We got to get that 16-year-old.
But notice, like, even nowadays, consumerism, like, there's no millennials anywhere. It's either Gen Xers or boomers. I mean, that still get catered to in certain things, and Zoomers. The millennial is erased because we have nothing. We have no disposable income. So
somebody didn't buy
nothing We did nothing. We were not even going to be a footnote in history. The millennial is over. It is so over for us aging millennials. You know?
Oh my God, this Gio. It's a different pod, man. That's all right.
That's all right.
No, it's good, man. No, I love it. It's just like my brain is just reeling by I'm just going, oh my God, really? But you're right,
incest,
man.
millennials being passed over.
Yeah. I will not live in the pod. I will not live in the house of incest.
I will not live. No, but the house of incest is a perfect metaphor because you experience your emotions through the other. What do you think a lot of the sort of like a lot of these online communities, like I wrote this essay actually where I quote House of Incest, where it's like the online ecology of it, like even like the way that if you do live in this pod existence, you do sort of live isolated, but yet in a group where you have this dynamic where you can experience emotion outside of the other. It's like really that's what the modern world is creating. It's going into the giga favela longhouse of incest. That's the modern world's turning us into. You know, that's what they want you to live. This is the pod.
Gio has opinions. I love it. We're gonna have a link to his. If you don't know Gio,
it for the tweet promo. You're gonna have to clip that.
No, not at all. No,
the Giga Favela Longhouse of Incest. Bronze Age pervert needs to listen to this episode.
Well, yeah, maybe. Well, if he does, let us know. Go on, Brad.
Okay,
very good.
Okay,
we arrived.
All right, that's all right. That was great. That was a great
digression. 3 hours.
And I picked it. Oh yeah, no,
crushing it. We're still gonna do the After Dark for
Patreon. Don't worry about it.
We're into page 16 of my 20-page outline, which includes the After Dark, right? So
bring us home, Brad.
Yeah. So, okay. The one thing about the whole lying situation with the two of them that I want to set up is she wants the life of extravagance that Hugo can provide her, but increasingly can't provide her because a lot of his he always thought he was going to be a millionaire and he never quite was, you know what I mean? And he always had like some new scheme about how he's going to invest and it was going to work out and it never quite worked. So she wanted the life of luxury and security he could provide, even though less and less that was so, but she wanted the mind-blowing sex with Rupert. She wanted both of these things. And
of course.
So instead of, and so she kind of develops a sense where she's sort of entitled to it in some way, right? She gets to have both of them, which that's the part that's like, you know, you don't get to have everything. Sorry. You know, that's an unacceptable message.
Sorry, honey, you don't get to have it all. Okay?
You don't. Yeah, man, nobody does. Anyway, so, but, you know, she hits about 50 years old and she still hasn't broken through as a writer. I mean, she's had that article by Edmund Wilson. She's had attention. Rebecca West thought she was great. She's had moments, but she's never really burst through into anything. And the question is, okay, how does this change? Why do we know who she is then, right? Why are we talking about her? Why is she a big deal? Why is there a million photos of her on the internet? Well, there's a couple of factors. One, she becomes a relentless opportunist. She becomes really confident in her work and will talk to everybody. And she leverages her narcissism and egomania into a hustle, right? Like, I'm going to make this happen. She will talk to everybody. She talks to Hollywood producers. She's always trying to talk her way. She's talking to publishers. She's always trying to talk her way. She's the first influencer. You know, really. Yeah. I mean, she does it. It's pretty even before Marilyn. Marilyn, yeah. So there's that, right? She's actually is working hard to make things happen for herself. The one thing I do respect about her is like the publishing world told her no, and she said, "Oh, I'm going to make this happen." Yeah. And I do admire that quality, right? Where you're like, I'm not going to take no for an answer. I'm going to buy my own printing press. How about that? You know? The other thing is, so that's going on. The other thing is Henry Miller becomes a literary superstar. He's a big deal, right? And then in 1956, this leads to an interesting little aside I want to get. So her star kind of rises with Henry Miller's in a way, right? Because she's sort of so paired with him. This biography memoir thing comes out by this writer called Fred Perlis. And Fred knew Anaïs and Henry back in the day in the 30s. And this book comes out called My Friend Henry Miller. And this is like a memoir and a biography of Henry Miller at the same time. And in it, he talks about Nin and Henry being together in a relationship, and Nin can't have that because ostensibly Hugo doesn't know that she slept with Henry, so she can't have this book coming out.
Oh man.
Right. So she manages to convince the writer Fred Perlis to change it so that the Nin character gets split into two. There's Nin, the friend and writer. So she's still in the book as a writer, and that helps her reputation. And then there is this made up woman who is having the affair with Henry. And it's so late in the game that they have to reprint the book. And guess who pays to reprint the book? Hugo pays to reprint the book.
Of course.
Hugo pays to reprint the book
because
if it doesn't get reprinted, he will find out that she was sleeping she was having an affair on him 20 years before, right? Just total insanity.
So I have a passage, by the way, but you go finish.
Go for it. No, well, that was all I was saying. So part of her, I kind of had this three-pronged thing of why she starts getting famous. One, hustle. Two, Henry Miller's becoming famous and her star kind of rises with his. And three, the feminists find her.
Oh yes, they find her hard. They find her good. Yeah.
Yes. So yeah, go ahead.
Kate Millett was one of her friends, if I recall.
Who's that?
Her. Kate Millett was one of very popular. Yep. Which I mean, Kate Millett's not actually good. She's a pretty good writer, actually. I should say, along with Eric Gary. But this illustrates. This is from her diary. This is around. I think I'm getting to the 50s now. This is from The Transparent Child. No, this is late 40s. This illustrates her relation to men, though. A child who enters your being by softness, a newborn man who asserts himself when he says, "I want you." We took our clothes off at the end and laid bodies to body, his sex erect. He spilled his seed too soon against me, not inside of me, so that I feel the warm rain over me. By the way, a lot of her erotic stories, that's one thing I forgot to mention, is written for women, but a particular type of woman, because there's not any form of reproduction involved in terms of, like, a lot of erotica. And again, I only know this for research purposes because of other things I tried to please. I mean nothing by this. A lot of erotica, especially when it's written by men, even if you read Delicious Tacos, our good friend, a lot of it has the fetishization over reproduction. A lot of like, please come inside of me. Like that is totally absent. Any reproductive organ. The only thing that she talks about in a lot of her erotica and Delta Venus is like her womb is on fire. But it is not like the skin, the outside, the penetration, but when it comes to the completion of the male act of the giving of life, to use a metaphor, it's totally absent in erotica. There's no hint, because men usually will fetishize reproduction. You know, like I said, just read Delicious Tacos, right? So maybe I should talk to him one day about that. But anyways, but here it's like the I know. The
right,
constant the spilling of seed is not in the womb. It's wasted, right? So here
that is actually just real quick. Her first affair with John Erskine. That's what happens. It's exactly, not. It's like unconsummated in this way. Yeah. But
here she talks about all the men she's with. What strange joys of birth, joys of erotic motherhood. His agony his enjoyment when I go out. When I went to the Ganderels at the 11th, so Hugo, who would know I had not been there. Bill went to France's and tried to telephone me, so I would leave. I had mentioned the Gandels having invited a man who would want to meet me. Bill asked me over the telephone when I got home, what did the man do? His insecurity is mine, and Hugo suffered because Bill will grow up, return in a uniform, a man, you will love him. I had no time for Lonnie, who is courting me again, who wants to reawaken my love. I have to put my love in Bill's hands and entrust with his hidden, unborn, unconscious self, whom he does not know yet. His love for me is unconscious, blind. His consciousness, he is a child, confused, inarticulate, reserved, separated. I go to Gonzalo and fulfill my unfinished sensual act, carrying in my body the warm caress of Bill. I have the child inside of me, Anaïs, the undying adolescence who persists in living out this relationship with another child. Bill looks at times like a young Rimbaud. Hugo is suffering, and together we have discovered that all through the past, his deadness was a secret, muted jealousy. I found the words to console him, but I cannot stem the flow of love. I drift, float, cannot work or write. I live like a flower now. I cannot hold back, direct, guide, or stop this flow of life. Hugo loves me for it and suffers from it. I love his concentration on me, but it is a burden. I carry his love with Bill like a precious seed. but that's the thing. Like, she's mixing metaphors of reproduction and awakening the child within other men, but living sensuously through other men when she is interrupted, having an emotional relationship with one man, going for a sexual relationship with another. But meanwhile, Hugo is all frustrated.
Yeah.
And she doesn't return his love.
Yeah. Now this is the thing, is it betrays a certain pathology, but also it does also do a good job of,
and it's also vaguely pedophilic, but that's besides the point.
But it does a good job of presenting the complications of being inside a person's head.
She's floating in life. She's floating between men, floating between locations. There is no self. Some kind of abstraction. Okay, there's the idea of Anaïs Nin, but the reality, you may touch her cold flesh and you may feel yours. So
yeah. She's such a trip.
I'm quoting Easton Ellis, by the way.
No, it's true. Oh, it's
Anaïs Nin, some kind of abstraction.
Well, that's not a bad title for the episode.
But I have another passage, but we'll get that to the end before we get to the Patreon part. So,
okay, cool. There's a couple, because there are a couple of points I want to hit. One thing, this is just an interesting anecdote. At one point in The Hustle, she tries to sell some letters. She's trying to make money, and the other thing is she always wants to sell the diaries, right? That's the thing. Everything else is just she's much more interested in getting her diaries published, and eventually they do, but mostly it gets rejected. It's like, why would we want to publish this? It's just a bunch of self-indulgent writing, right? Eventually it does get published and does okay, but at one point she goes to the Kinsey Institute, right? And and she tries to sell them portions of her diary or her letters. And they say, well, we can't buy them from you. We don't really have the budget for that. And also, we already have some of your letters. She's like, what do you mean? She's like, yeah, we get our hands on whatever kinds of descriptions of sex, like the psychology of sexuality we can. God. And like somebody who'd managed to get their hands on it. She doesn't even know who thought that they would be a good fit at the Kinsey Institute.
They would be, and ironically, they would be a good fit there.
Yeah. I just thought that was interesting. You go there and like, it's already here. Like, you guys already have this. Okay, so
Anaïs Nin was an agent of the deep state, by the way. So
she might have been. I don't know. I mean, I think everybody
helped invent it.
She may have helped invent the deep state.
Usually on our show, we're like, was this person a spy? And now it's like, was this person somebody who inspired the spies?
Right.
Geez. Yeah, muse.
Yeah. Now she gets kind of like, the times catch up with her is kind of what happens, I think, in terms of why her writing takes off. Her last novel, Collages, ends up on the Time Christmas list. Like, Time puts this list out of like, here's some things you should buy for Christmas, baby, and it ends up in there, right? And she becomes, by the mid 60s, she's celebrated, and she's making more money than Hugo. I think after 1966, she would end up financing Hugo instead of the other way around. And a lot of that's sort of payback. Henry Miller also comes back and starts writing her monthly checks too, because his star has grown so high, and I think he did feel a certain amount of indebtedness. But here's the thing: are
we doing this wrong? By the way, like, should we be cutting each other checks?
No.
Brett, no.
Well,
yes. No. I mean, I guess we do it with Patreon.
You cut me a check, and I'll cut you a check, Kevin.
Yeah. It just the way that people handled their finances in the past always surprises me. It's always like, well, my uncle cut me a check, and I went to live in France for 2 years. And you just go like, what?
Yeah.
This does not compute.
Yeah.
A small loan of $1 million.
Right.
Yeah.
I want to tell you a little bit about, let me read you this passage about how she presented herself when her fame kicked off. This is the late 1960s. And she's an older woman. I mean, 1960s, she's in her 60s, right? The public perception of Nin at this time can be seen in an article about Miller's banned books written by Joseph Kay, the New York correspondent of the Kansas City Star. Kay thought her in, quote, early Greenwich Village beatnik, who also writes in the unorthodox manner of Miller. He was staggered by her appearance, quote, clad in a stunning Grecian robe and gold slippers. Like so many others, he was awed by the long flowing recamae gowns and the gauzy Indian cottons she wore. She was 58. Okay, it was a little earlier than I thought, but still. She was 58, but could have passed for a woman in her late 30s or early 40s. Her hair was newly lightened to a becoming blonde. Her body was slim and taut from swimming, daily massage, and scrupulous attention to her diet. Her face was exquisitely made up, and she positioned herself carefully in the apartment's flattering, soft pink lighting. Kay was so captivated that he swallowed her version of her life without question, that she had helped Miller considerably when he was penniless in Paris, right? So this is how she presents herself. And she's evocative. She walks down the street and she's sort of like peacock feathers and weird ribbons and costumed kind of, right?
Typical Hollywood socialite.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And yeah, she'd be, and she would at times she would make up her face almost completely white, and then she would make her eyes very dark, right? Like very, very dark. So almost like this like Helena Bonham Carter in Fight Club kind of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's sort of almost how I picture her.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
So much things are going on. So much fantasy is going on here.
Oh yeah. Well, she's living in the dream, right? Now she starts to get, here's another thing. This is the one I was thinking of when she was in her 60s. She's getting letters constantly, right? This is the fan mail is kicked off. The women love her. There were not many 63-year-old women who walked the street in broad daylight with their hair entwined with ribbons and flowers and piled high on their heads, who wore long flowing gowns of white cashmere or silver lame covered with dramatic capes that once belonged to parish priests or French policemen, and who painted their face and lips dead white in the fashion of the day and darkened their eyes so heavily they were startling when glimpsed unexpectedly on a sunny afternoon. She was a striking presence as she stood online at the post office or methodically churned out page after page at the local photocopy machine. Her lifelong attention to physical appearance was now paying dividends. As she progressed through her 60s, everyone assumed she was a woman in her early 50s, and she did not disabuse them of this notion. Nin realized how much her personal appearance enhanced the sale of her books, and she did everything she could to capitalize on it, including registering with the respected lay lecture agency. She was immediately booked on a grueling schedule that would have defeated a much younger woman. So she capitalized on her fame for a writer by going constantly lecturing, going to colleges and lecturing to mostly groups of women, right? On her writing, on sexuality, on being a woman, on all of these things.
Anaïs Nin ruined a whole generation of women, like literally.
Yeah. Now,
unmute yourself, Kevin.
Yeah.
I was just gonna say, it sounds like a lot of women hit the wall. It sounds like she literally hit the wall. She barreled through the wall.
She did.
She conquered it. Yeah, she conquered it.
You got to respect that. I do respect that.
She broke down the walls of Jericho. Holy crap!
Yeah. And then this moment comes after she starts getting success in the mid 60s, and she starts making the money. She starts looking at the life she has with Hugo in New York, and she's like, "Why do I even go there anymore?" Suddenly now she's got what she wants. Like, why do I care? So she focuses more on the Rupert relationship, and Rupert ends up turning out to be kind of a decent guy in the end, it seems. He's built a house now that's designed by Frank Lloyd Wright's son, I guess. So designed this house that she now lives in. So she's living in an art inside of an art project, basically. And it is a sort of striking modern home in Malibu. And that's where she sort of ends her life. Her marriage to Rupert is technically annulled because the tax situation gets so complicated, right? She's making money, but who's she married to and how does the taxes work? She eventually has to get the marriage annulled. Hugo does find out about it towards the end. Rupert finds out about it towards the end, that she's been living this sort of double life. It all kind of comes out. Somehow there isn't an explosion of sort of anger. It's like everybody knew and they finally just acknowledged it, really. There were some weird late night phone calls. Like Rupert was at a party when she was in New York and heard a rumor. So he called the number she was supposed to be at and Hugo answered. And there were some complications, but ultimately Rupert and Hugo ended up knowing each other and being on reasonably good terms.
Is she around?
Yeah,
bro.
Right.
Hey.
The one last little piece I want to talk about is her health and the end. Right.
All right.
I'm just trying to get this, bring this home here. She had pretty bad health most of her life, right? We had the whole burst appendix thing. She drank too much. I don't know if she was technically an alcoholic or not, but she definitely drank too much. She was on a lot of medications. She was
par for the course.
She was on speed for years, all this traveling. There were times where she was so tired out from having sex with so many people that she couldn't get out of bed.
Whoa.
Dude, life goals, squad goals.
Whoa,
that's remarkable.
That's Sigma grind set right there.
That's right.
Yeah. And also the way she died. I wonder all that contributed to. Anyways, go ahead.
Yeah,
go ahead.
this is what we're going to talk about.
Brad's going to bring us there. Yeah.
1953, they find out she has a tumor as big as an orange on her ovary. It's benign apparently, but they remove it, and nothing is ever good for her health wise after this. After 1953, she has an enlarged heart, cramps in her legs, heart murmur, chronic nasal irritation and bleeding, and anemia. She no longer can handle being in the cold at all. And she starts, of course, reporting it in these very strange kind of terms, the way that Anaïs Nin would, right? Because remember, her distinctions between the internal sort of poetic reality and the
real reality
it's sort of all mixed up. I want to just read this one quick thing when she's talking about her symptoms, because I think it's kind of beautiful, but kind of funny too. She sent a list of symptoms to her doctor, requesting an appointment for a physical examination. In language more surrealistic than medical, she described how she was sometimes awakened at dawn with the, quote, faint feeling of a trembler, in which her heart felt as if a liquid were trying to pass through a rough channel. At other times, she felt, quote, a kind of suspense, followed by, quote, a heavy drop falling in slow rhythm. Most important, however, was her statement that, quote, on the emotional level, I've been disturbed, but I am under analysis. So she's like, it's all sort of like figures merging out of the fog in the dream in which she's living. That's her symptoms, right? By 1969, long after menopause has come and gone for her, she starts to bleed from the vagina. And she so much bleeding from that she has to like wear a tampon to keep it from, for what tampons do, right? But not
a healthy sign, by the way.
It's not good when blood's just falling out of you, right? Like not part of the normal processes. This was the beginning of the cancer that would eventually take her life, right? It would expand into cervical cancer, or maybe it started as cervical cancer. It's not totally clear. And it would lead to intense pain, addiction to Darvon or whatever. And then they were starting to.
Oh yeah, Darvon. That's fun. That always comes back, doesn't it?
It does. Yeah. So she was on that for years, for like 8 years. In 1974, the cancer came back so much that it unfortunately ruined lovemaking with Rupert for months. In the same year, she was inducted, however, into the American Academy and Institute of Arts and Letters. So she's arrived creatively. But the health thing just deteriorates. It's just a gradual deterioration. There's some misdiagnosis and missteps medically, but it's just slow degradation. I'm going to read a couple more things and then I'm kind of done with her life story.
But you mean to tell me that a life of promiscuity, drug addiction, abortion, that they contribute to cervical cancer?
I have no idea.
That's an evil right-wing Republican pro-life conspiracy.
I'm not an expert,
Yeah. It's medical. It's medical.
This podcast is an expert truster pod.
Expert.
Yeah. Listen, it's medical it's disinformation to say that abortion contributes to cancer or promiscuity contributes to cancer in any way. There's no such thing as microchimerism. Please, it's all disinformation.
She was a very handsome woman late into life. I'm looking at pictures of her.
Yeah.
She really kept it together. She really did. On the outside anyway. Anyway.
Yeah. I'm gonna give you a quote from her.
On the inside, it was Ragnarok, but
Yeah, right.
Right.
No,
Absolute
demons fighting
pandemonium.
demons in
Yeah,
there.
just total hell. Yeah.
I'm gonna give you a quote from her, and then I'll tell you the story of the end of her life. I am not there. My body has slipped away. Now, she still looked forward for the daily arrival of fan mail, but wondered why if it no longer made her happy. What is it? What has happened to me? A sorrow of enormous depth lies at the bottom. Oh, so heavy. I cannot resume my joy. It is not the concept of death, the parting from all love. It is a profound sorrow at the loss of my energy, my fire. There is a void. Before my illness, I was physically and emotionally close to everyone. Yeah, right. Now there is a distance. Okay, now this is as she's getting iller and sicker. And let me just read you the last bit. Anaïs grew steadily weaker throughout December 1976, but Rupert continued to care for her until her lungs filled with fluid and she lapsed into a coma. Rupert helps her out. I should read this one other little bit because her illness gets kind of insane. Let me read one other bit that I meant to, because I want to give you a sense of how you said her body's Ragnarok. Let me tell you how Ragnarok it was. At one point they have to put a bag on her because stuff is falling apart and they have to capture fluids. The continuous torment of the leaking bag, the overactive fistula, hours spent lying flat in bed waiting for the nurse, the anxiety when a visitor comes that the leak should happen, awakening at night to find it has burst, wearing a dress I love and the fistula staining it, getting up 2 or 3 times a night to empty the bag, the feeling of an impure body, the saddest hours are those spent waiting for the nurse. When the bag leaks, I have to take it off and lie flat in bed with wash rags to sponge off the horrible content of the fistula. The hole is deep, the discharge ugly, green, yellow. I often weep. So just,
oh my God, that's
totally falling apart, right? Just
that,
yeah.
That's the description of the guy that had radiation sickness in Japan. Oh my God.
Yeah. So this is right at the end. She grew steadily weaker throughout December 1976, but Rupert continued to care for her until her lungs filled with fluid and she lapsed into a coma. She died at the Cedars of Lebanon Hospital on January 14, 1977. Her death certificate cited as causes cardiorespiratory arrest, severe malnutrition, and widespread metastatic carcinoma. Early the next morning, Rupert telephoned Joaquin, that's her father, who then telephoned Hugo. When Nin's obituaries appeared, the New York Times reported that she was survived by her husband, Hugh P. Geiler, and the Los Angeles Times reported that she was survived by her husband, Rupert Pohl. Both men were exceedingly considerate of each other's feelings, and with Joaquin acting as intermediary, this is her brother Joaquin, not her father. And with Joaquin acting as intermediary, it was agreed by both that Hugo would allow her, quote, friends to take charge of her burial. Anaïs Nin, the Pisces, influenced all of her life by the sign, quote, ruled by Neptune, the planet of illusion, asked to be buried at sea. So Rupert took her ashes aloft in a small plane over Santa Monica Bay. Studying the navigation charts while the pilot flew, he noticed that all the markings were described by ordinary fish names except for one, Mermaid Cove. He directed the plane to fly there and dropped the bright pink blanket containing the ashes of Anaïs Nin just as a ray of sunlight broke through the overcast January sky. His eyes followed the blanket's descent to where it lay floating on top of the water for a very long time. When Rupert returned to Silver Lake, he discovered that Mermaid Cove was directly over the hill from the house's living area, obscured from view by a willow tree. Several weeks later, for no discernible reason, the healthy tree died. Rupert believes it did not want to impede his view of Mermaid Cove. He never planted another. So,
wow.
Another one of these charmed death things where something mystical, we see this on every episode we do where they die and then somebody reports some strange thing happened in the end.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah, that's the night life of Nin. We're going to talk in the After Dark about her relationship with her father, but yes.
Wow.
Well done, Brad. Well done, Gio.
Yeah, that was great.
We went all around the block. Gio, you were going to say.
No, this one last passage comes from the Anaïs Nin Literary Journal, Cafe in Space, about the image of Nin. So this one passage says, extensively and with great detail about women's sexuality and the way in which art and sex are both part of women's creativity. Furthermore, as a socialite and lover of sex, non-monogamy, theater, and dance, Nin wore dramatic-looking capes, dark lipstick, long dresses, blah, blah, blah. Nin too reconstituted herself through posting for photographs and films. So, all those Instagram influencers, all the Sarah Babas of the world, you got nothing on Anaïs Nin. You're all just a bunch of shallow bitches compared to her. So
where can they? Yeah, all right, good.
Yeah.
You should see there's a documentary that came out in 1974 called Anaïs Nin Observed, and it's of her at her home, and it's the most Instagrammy thing that could have possibly been made imaginable. In 1974.
Yeah. Barth's room. So this talks about Roland Barthes in film, or rather the Camera Lucidia, which is a good. I personally like that. I love Roland Barthes. So the act of looking back through authorial editing is one of the ways Nin performs. Barthes reminds us that reconstitution, transformation, and interpretation come from various places and serves different purposes, and that the world is constantly subject to interpretation because it's constantly being reinvented by new eyes. He recognized that visual images are ambiguous, filled with layers of gazes and splitting of the subject idea and identity through posing for photographs. A photograph doesn't end with the image on the surface, but rather photographs have an interior life. And so this is a linchpin of a lot of postmodern writing around the art of photography, especially camera lucidia. Barth's reading of photographs is in stark contrast to tradition that sees photographs in film, especially of women, purely as reductive spectacles. Laura Mulvey, as well as Robert Snyder, understand film and photography as existing with the dichotomous arrangement of the subject and the object. If we take this view, however, we lose sight of all the complexities of being photographed and looking at pictures Barth lays out for us in Camera Lucidia. Barth writes that a splitting of selves occurs. We are the photographed as well as we look at pictures, rendering the subject-object binary overtly simplistic. As I discussed Nin in the following pages, I want to keep in mind the way in which she reconstitutes herself, where she is looked at, either consciously or unconsciously, that it not to place any value judgment on either conscious or unconscious reconstitution, for both Barths and Nin teaches that the interpretation transformation by oneself or by others' eyes are entirely unavoidable. And then in this passage in the beginning, she writes, "In The Spy in the House of Love is a precursor to the second volume of Durrell's quartet, Livia, living a fractured and buried life, unseen and unknown, which must ultimately be exhumed and exposed as an object lesson in personal and universal culture. And I would suggest that the inevitable lie which we must employ until the moment of revelation, which Nin called the mensonge vital, the lie which gives life, allowing us to escape from eternal abhorrent present of oneself, as Durrell puts it, then becomes the point of transformation when the masks we wear cease to be masks of concealment and become masks of heraldry, of identity. And this, I believe, is what distinguishes the Three Musketeers. Talks about other literature people. But essentially, it says that she is imbuing herself with, quote, minor mythologies of popular literature, the idea of relatively making many people fearful, the idea that you are one person who, this is a quote from Anaïs Nin, the idea of relativity makes many people fearful, the idea that you are one person with me today and another person with someone else later. So again, the fluidity of herself is reflected in the photographs in the film and the way that she presents herself as a public figure. She really, before Marilyn Monroe, before Jane Mansfield, she is the first public celebrity in that sense. She is presenting different sides of herself through film. It's something that you could take to its like utter postmodern extremes with something like the film scenes from Cindy Sherman's photographs, right? Where
I don't know those.
Yeah, where she's doing like motifs of films, but they're like disembodied from like a particularity of any film. It's basically like essentially she's filming herself doing like tropes from cinema, but it's like disembodied and like postmodern in the sense. So yeah. Anaïs Nin does this as well. So
and that's what Belle of Atlantis is kind of like that too. The film that Hugo was basically starring her was like that. And Nin was also in a Kenneth Anger film. What is it? Something at the Pleasure Dome. I'm blanking on the full name of it now. Where she is sort of presenting herself in this sort of cobbled together mythological
inauguration of the Pleasure Dome. Of course, Kenneth Anger's a Crowleyan, definitely had some Crowley interest. That was a banger, certified. Gio, thank you so much for coming on.
Yeah, no problem.
You want to? And we're going to talk more on the After Dark. artofdarkpod.com, patreon.com/artofdarkpod. Book club coming 2023. We're going to kick off in January.
Nice.
We're going to make an announcement. Our friends over at the New Right Pod, I went on. They've yet to put the episode out, but when it comes out, when they edit out all my Fed posting,
did they bring up Jaws? Did somebody bring up Jaws?
No, nobody brought up Jaws. No, but the point is, get in on the Patreon now. It's $3 now to get in. It's going to go to $5 on January 1st. If you get in now, you'll be grandfathered in. We hope you want to support the show. We love our Patreon subscribers. We love everybody who listens to Art of Darkness, even the people who kvetch at us.
Yeah, we won't get any kvetching after this episode.
No, not at all. Not at all. Yeah. Gio, do you want to, before we exit briefly to then return and do the After Dark episode, do you want to give your plugs, tell people where to find you?
Yeah, sure. Well, my everyone knows me on Twitter, twitter.com/Giant Gio. Go to YouTube for the public version of all my podcasts. Giant Productions, and of course patreon.com/Giant Productions. I'm on Telegram as Giant Productions. I have also other things too, like Instagram and all that, but working on my website to sell my artwork and stuff. So yeah, but support me on Patreon, Giant Productions, at patreon.com/Giant Productions. There you go.
Do it.
Well, we got to ask the final. You got to, I guess, you got to field it for me.
Yeah. What would Anaïs Nin be doing now, Kevin?
Well, I'll start, and then because I don't feel like I'm going to be.
She'd be
I know that's what I'm saying.
I
think she's on the gram, but I also think she's extraordinarily sophisticated about it, and I think she might be doing pop-ups or weird events. She might.
Yeah.
She
like
might
if
be
Rupi
working
Kaur was talented.
Exactly. Like if Rupi Kaur was talented. Exactly. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And
she would have a feminist phase, but then she would be canceled for various things. She'd go through a post-left phase, and she'd be in Dime Square. She'd be on Red Scare. She'd be the third host of Red Scare. There you go. That's what she'd be doing nowadays. She would get so viciously canceled for racism.
She'd be hanging out with Palia. She'd be an Art of Darkness stan, I think. Yeah.
Maybe.
Yeah. Well, in any case, that you really gave a comprehensive picture for. I'm going to roll this around in my brain for a while. Gio, thank you so much for coming on. It sounds like we're going to have to do, if it's not next year, at some point we're going to have to do Munch. This is your favorite artist, and you're a painter, so that could be very cool.
And thanks so much for coming on, man. We really,
this
has been great.
It's been a hoot
on this for a while, so
all right, and we're going to do some more time here shortly. We're going to come back, and in the meantime, we're going to try not to betray any of our lovers.
I'm a true Sal, so it's very easy for me.
Yes, well.
All right, thanks again. All right, we'll see you in a few minutes.
Bye.